All right, everybody, we're ready. Ben, wake up. Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were awake and ready to rock. All right.
Man, I love that song.
Let me get the video here. All right, looking good there. Okay, your Ben Joravsky show for Friday, June 7th is moments away. But before we get into it, we'd like to thank the following unions for jumping on board and bringing back the Ben Joravsky show. First up, it's the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local 126 in District 8, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 9, and the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150. A giant thank you to those unions for jumping on board and bringing back the Ben Joravsky show. And, of course, today's program is brought to you by our good friends at the Chicago Federation of Labor. The Ben Joravsky show starts now. Thank goodness it is Friday, June 7th, and live from the Chicago Sun-Times Chicago Reader Studio on Racine Avenue, this is the Ben Joravsky Show. Today on the program, it's another Romano Rundown with Sun-Times editor Romano Hussein. Professor and author of The World is Always Coming to an End, Carlo Rotella will join us. And it's the Ben Joravsky Show debut of Samina Mustafa. And now your host, not the Ben Joravsky Show debut. He's the host. Chicago Reader columnist Ben Joravsky.
Hello, everybody. Ben Joravsky here. We're calling this Don't Tell Dennis Friday.
What?
And here's why. Yes, indeed, folks. I hopped out of bed this morning all bright and cheery because it was a beautiful, sunshiny, gorgeous day outside, and I announced to my wife, honey, I'm going to ride my bike to work today. And she said, oh, that's nice. You want an avocado and cheese sandwich? I love those avocado and cheese sandwiches. Anyway, so I was all prepared to get on my bike and ride to work when I got a call from Dennis, a.k.a. Dr. D.
Not a doctor.
It went a little something like this. Hey, D, I'm going to ride my bike to work today. And Dennis says, did you do your pre-show prep? Oh, man, here's something you should know, everybody. Dr. D is the boss of this show, not me.
Sit up straight.
He calls the shots. Man, he's no joke. Did I tell you they call him White Lightning?
No one calls me that.
Anyway, here's the deal. I do my pre-show prep every day, and it consists of reading not one, not two, but three. Yeah, 3 daily newspapers.
And how the hell are you going to read those on your bike?
That's why we call him Dr. D, all right? So now it's true. You're going to say, but Ben, perhaps if you got up a little earlier than 9 a.m., you would have time to read the newspapers.
Oh, I tried that battle years ago, ladies and gentlemen.
When the rooster crows, cock-a-doodle-don't. But, you know, folks, I got those rock star hours, and I'm up late reading books. So what can I tell you, folks? I do my pre-show prep on the train. It takes about an hour to get in here. It gives me time to read not one, not two, but three. Count them, 3 newspapers. And so anyway, I said to Dr. D, oh, man, all right. And I go, do I got it? And he goes, did you read the Sun-Times? No, I didn't. Did you read the Tribune? No, I didn't. Did you read the New York Times? No, I didn't. Well, get on that train, boy. That's what he said to me.
Hey, sit up straight.
Oh, yes. So anyway, onto the train I went, and I hopped on that choo-choo train, and I took out my beloved Bright One, and I was all set to read yet another article about Jussie Smollett, the case that will never go away, when who should I see sitting across the aisle but a political strategist in Chicago that I will call Don't Quote Me. And why am I calling him Don't Quote Me? Because every time I see him, he always says, whatever you do, don't quote me. I guess this guy is so afraid of having anything remotely controversial linked to him. He always says, don't quote me. I could say, hey, man, how you doing? And he'll go, don't quote me, but I'm doing pretty well. Don't quote me. Anyway, Don't Quote Me was just back from Springfield, D, all right? And he was there all last week watching the wheeling and the dealing and the backroom betrayals going down, and he was telling me one story after another as the train went past Belmont and Fullerton and Merchandise Mart and into the Loop. And then he hops off the train, and you know what I realized, D?
What?
I hadn't done my pre-show
Good
prep.
God.
Man, I could tell you so many stories of the backroom betrayals in Springfield, except I have to go by what I said, and that is don't quote me means don't quote me. So you just have to trust me, folks. There was a lot of wheeling and dealing in Springfield last week, and guess what? The moneyed interest won. Big surprise there. Particularly on that gambling bill, by the way. Oh, my God. I could really tell you some stories about that gambling bill. Anyway, as I said, when I got off the train, I realized, uh-oh, I used up all my prep time talking to don't quote me. Whatever you do, people, don't tell Dennis. We got a great show today, everybody. Ramana Hussein will be here in the studio. Don't worry. I found the time to read my beloved Bright One. I've got lots of stories to talk about with Ramana. It's the Ramana Rundown every Friday right here on the Ben Joravsky Show. And at 2 o'clock, Carlo Rotello, professor, here's the book. Everybody see the book? Professor from Boston, but he actually grew up on the south side of Chicago. The world is coming to an end. Fascinating story about changes in the city of Chicago, changes in his home, South Shore neighborhood, gentrification pressures, the pressures of public policy and how they harm neighborhoods or improve other neighborhoods. Carlo Rotello is his name. The world is always coming to an end. I'm looking forward to talking about that book. And then at 2:30, the legendary Samina Mustafa. She ran for Congress in the 5th Congressional District. I always like to say she's Chicago's own Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The difference being Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was victorious in 2018, and Samina was not victorious. She lost to Mike Quigley. It tells you something about New York and Chicago. Somehow, New York is, I guess, more cutting edge or progressive or liberal than the city of Chicago, which is, don't like to make big changes in the city of Chicago. We're a little slow, like to keep the congressman that we have for a long, long time. But anyway, Samina Mustafa is here to talk about politics, national, local, Medicare for all the issues of the day. Enjoyed talking with Samina, so we'll be talking politics, and some deep dive into South Shore. But before we do any of that, Young Doctor has the news.
Not a doctor. All right. Well, first off, I am always bossing you around. That should have been called Don't Quote Me Friday.
Okay.
Would have been a better title.
There you go. Don't quote. This is what I'm saying.
Come on, guy. Good Lord. Okay.
Hey, you went to radio school. I did not.
I know. It's the middle of the final day of the week. Bring it, weekend. And before we find out what's happening nationally this afternoon, well, we must what?
Nothing. Don't quote me, but you're right.
And before we find out what's happening nationally this afternoon, we must shamelessly plug our weekend Benny J bonus interviews.
Oh, yeah.
Every Saturday, Sunday, and Monday at both Chicago Reader and Chicago Sun-Times websites, chicagoreader.com, chicago.suntimes.com/Joravsky, and wherever else you download your favorite podcast. A brand new one-on-one interview with the well-known or soon-to-be well-known name. Here's our lineup this weekend. On Saturday, he's a WBEZ guy. He's demographer and dear friend of the Ben Joravsky Show. He's Mr. Alden Lowry. He'll be coming in the studio after today's show. Benny J, tell us what to expect in your interview.
Yeah,
Mr.
Alden Lowry is a brilliant guy, and he hasn't been on the new show. He used to come on the old show from time to time. His expertise is the demographics in the city of Chicago, the changing neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, and the way policy sort of shapes changes, forces changes, and he's been following these trends for a long time. It was Alden Lowry whose research was sort of the cutting edge research showing about the patterns in which black people were moving out of Chicago and the black population was falling. So lots to talk about between the intersection between population changes and politics with Alden Lowry.
So that's Saturday's interview, available for you to download at 6 a.m. tomorrow. On Sunday, Bernie Bros rejoice. Ben sat down and talked with an Our Revolution member here. His name is Joseph. Oh, and I'm going to butcher this one. Givargis?
Yeah, that's good. Joseph Givargis.
All right, Joseph Givargis is his name. He's currently driving an ambulance, maybe in a town near you. Ben, tell us about your talk with Joseph.
Joseph, brilliant guy. He's been a political strategist, community activist, and just essentially on the front lines fighter for social change for many years. He's the executive director of Our Revolution, which of course is a spinoff from Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign. They're in town, putting pressure on congressmen, Democratic congressmen, folks, yes, including the aforementioned Michael Quigley, Dan Lipinski on the Southwest side, to vote for a Medicare for All plan. This is the coming issue for the Democrats. Dennis said it first. He's absolutely correct. The Democrats champion Medicare for all. That's the key to victory. Not just the key to victory in the 2020 election. It's the key to sanity for our country right now. Our insane policy of having the insurance companies cover insurance, medical insurance, just drives up the cost, keeps it from being available to one and all. It forces employers to essentially pay money to insurance companies that they could otherwise be paying to their employees. You make less money. I don't know why anybody thinks it's in their best interest unless they own an insurance company. So anyway, Joe has a lot to say on that issue and many more, and we get into some of the national political talk with the Bernie Sanders campaign. So a real Bernie bro in the studio. We did the interview yesterday. He was sitting right over there, emanating Bernie bro vibes.
So that's Sunday's interview. Joseph G. Varghese. Find out why exactly he's driving an ambulance in a town near you. That'll be available Sunday at 6 a.m. And on Monday, it's all things local politics, Lightfoot, suburban airports, and so much more with our good friend, political strategist Del Marie Cobb.
Yeah, Del Marie Cobb, in my humble opinion, is one of the smartest political strategists in the city of Chicago. She's been operating here since the 70s, and she knows the game as it's played in the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, and yes, we started taking the deep dive about Lori Lightfoot and the hope for a new Chicago. And next thing you know, we started talking about the politics of airports and why the South Suburban Airport won't be built. And even though it could be an engine for change for the South Side and for the South Suburbs. So good talk. Good stuff with Del Marie Cobb.
That'll be at 5 a.m. on Monday. So
get up early, everybody.
Once again, Saturday by 6 a.m., WBEZ reporter and our resident demographer, Alden Lowry. Sunday by 6 a.m., Joseph, the ambulance man, G. Varghese of Our Revolution. And Monday by 5 a.m., political strategist Del Marie Cobb. It's this weekend's Benny J bonus interviews. Download only YouTube Nation at both Chicago Sun-Times and Chicago Reader websites or wherever else you download your podcast. By the way, we're now on Spotify. Yeah. Tell your friends. All right, now let's talk about the national news. Oh, this flip-floppy president of ours. So earlier today, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that tariffs on Mexican goods are still scheduled to take effect Monday. Here's the quote from Huckabee Sanders. And Ben, listen to how certain she sounds here. Quote, "Our position hasn't changed. Tariffs are going to take effect on Monday."
Okay.
See?
Oh, well, okay. Yeah.
She said it.
All right.
Then later on, it was reported that Donald Trump may decide over the weekend to delay his planned tariffs on Mexico. Mark Short, the chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence, said the tariffs may be delayed if weekend negotiations between the U.S. and Mexico go well. So, mission accomplished, I guess. We don't know what the hell this guy's going to do.
I'm sure he doesn't either, by the way.
Yeah, that's pretty true. Donald Trump also fired back at House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Ben, calm down. Calm down,
By the way,
buddy.
Samina has a different point of view. I should just tell you folks right now, our 2:30 guest, Samina has a vastly different point of view about Nancy Pelosi than I do.
So unlike you, she doesn't write love letters to Nancy Pelosi.
She has not written a letter that says, "I heart Nancy Pelosi," ever.
Thank God. Bring some sanity into this studio, Samina. Yeah. But Donald Trump also fired back at Speaker Nancy Pelosi for her comment to fellow Democrats that he should be, quote, in prison instead of getting impeached. And Donald Trump called her a disgrace to herself and her family.
Oh, he said that?
Yeah.
I missed that tweet. What am I, Donald, he just learned from you. You go, lock him up, lock her up. Remember that lock her up chant at the Republican convention in 2016 about Hillary Clinton? So, you know, it just shows you, Donald, you've had an influence on the Democrats as well. You should be proud. Trash talking vis-a-vis Twitter, D. It's
no collusion.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
He said it right there.
Yeah, no
collusion.
Well, if he said so, it must be true.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
In other news, our 2020 Democratic presidential candidates are out and about today, campaigning like crazy. Today, activists across the United States are marking National Gun Violence Awareness Day. People across the country are wearing orange. I can't talk today. People across the country are wearing orange as a symbolic call for safety and an end to shootings. And our Democratic POTUS hopefuls are taking their plans to curb curb gun violence in America to action. Senator and candidate Elizabeth Warren today called for ending, quote, the NRA's death grip on our federal government. Here's the tweet from Warren. Tweet on National Gun Violence Awareness Day, I'm thinking about how country loses an average of 7 children and teens to gun violence every day. Enough is enough. I'm fighting like hell for gun reform now and to end the NRA's death grip on our federal government.
Yeah, there's a certain madness that exists in our society, in American society, this obsession with guns, this obsession with shooting people. I really don't, there are no simple solutions to this, but there's just some obvious steps that we can take without obliterating the Second Amendment. People get so nervous. What was that? What was our guest the other day? I can't remember which guest it was that threw that out there, the notion that Democrats were going to get rid of the Second Amendment. Remember who that was? I can't remember who it was. But it's, this fatalistic attitude that the gun lovers, the gun loving culture in this country, the NRA, puts out there, that somehow or other any attempt to regulate the sale of guns, any attempt to have a background check, is the step toward taking away our liberties, taking away our guns. It's absurd. And by the way, they're the same people who, they talk about liberties, but apparently it's only liberties in regards to guns. They don't talk about liberties in things like a woman's right to choose, etc. So there's a madness in our country, and I hope to be optimistic. But it's really hard to remain optimistic, because year after year, no matter how many mass shootings we have, it just doesn't seem as though we're able to pass laws in the face of the opposition from the NRA. So I'm hoping for the best with Elizabeth Warren, maybe, or Bernie Sanders. But even Bernie, I don't know, he's kind of weak on gun control. It may have been the Bernie guy who started talking about the Second Amendment. Can't remember for sure.
POTUS candidate and South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg and husband Chasten, they got their dogs involved in this. They posted pictures of them wearing orange bandanas on Gun Violence Awareness Day. Candidate and California Representative Eric Swalwell has released the first ad of his presidential campaign targeting gun violence. That's been his core issue since he announced his candidacy. The ad began running Friday in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and other states. For the record, as opposed to online videos, Swalwell is one of the first Democratic candidates that is running television ads. 2020 Democratic POTUS candidate Beto O'Rourke, in a video from the Atlanta airport, says the U.S. will continue to lose 100 lives a day to gun violence until we, quote, adopt universal background checks, close all loopholes, stop selling weapons of war into our communities, leave those on the battlefield, and until we enact red flag laws everywhere so that anyone who is in danger to themselves or someone else is stopped before it's too late.
Yeah, and he's sort of evolving on that issue as well. When he was a candidate for Senate in Texas, he distanced himself a little bit because, again, the NRA is very strong in Texas. It didn't help him. He still lost to Ted Cruz. So, again, that's the practical reality of Democrats face when they're in a primary and they're trying to appeal to the liberal wing of the Democratic Party. They have obviously a more liberal view on gun control. But when they move into the general election or when they're running in states that are red or purple, they kind of back off on that one. So that's maybe part of the reason why we haven't had sensible gun control. It's so hard to pass it. It's been so hard to pass it in the past.
And finally, he was once a Democratic presidential candidate. Former President Barack Obama, he weighed in on Twitter. Here's Obama. Last week it was Virginia Beach, but day after day and year after year, too many families and communities are shattered by senseless gun violence. We can't get numb to this. On National Gun Violence Awareness Day, pledge to speak out. Hashtag wear orange and vote to protect lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Barack Obama, it was under his watch in 2000. It's not his fault, but in 2012, Sandy Hook occurred. And I thought for certain that would spark sort of more sanity in our gun laws, and it did not. So this has been going on for an absolutely long time, and I'm starting to think about the impact that this like outside forces have on our obsession with guns. Just many of the movies that I've loved watching all these years, D, where there's shoot ups and heads blow off and body parts are incinerated. I guess it leads to that passion, this obsession we have, this love for weaponry.
Now, of course, we will keep you posted on these stories as today's program rolls along, but we're moving on, people. We're going to find out what's going on locally. It's time for What Else Is News, and we have an unexpected, but really when you think about it, yeah, pretty expected critic of Governor J.B. Pritzker and the newly signed Illinois budget.
The poor is going to hurt the most in the middle class. The other one going to hurt the most. And then that's my beef right there. I think that if you're looking at ways of spending and things of that nature and balance the budget and things of that nature, you can take care of it.
It's Willie Wilson. More on that in a moment. But first, our Chicago mayor, Lori Lightfoot, is away in California this week. She is slated to headline a fundraiser in Palm Springs for former Senator Barbara Boxer's PAC. But back here in Chicago, Ben, it's business as usual. Lori Lightfoot's choice to lead the Department of Housing sat down with aldermen on Thursday. The following comes from the Chicago Sun-Times, and Ben, just take one guess as to who wrote this Sun-Times article.
Fran Spielman.
That's right.
She covers the beat.
The one and only Fran the Woe Man Spielman. Mayor Lori Lightfoot, her choice to lead a revived Department of Housing got an earful from aldermen Thursday on ways to solve the affordable housing crisis driving Chicago's precipitous population decline. During her time as vice president of the Metropolitan Planning Council, Marissa Novara was among those who argued that a 5-year, $1.4 billion plan crafted by then-Mayor Rahm Emanuel to build or preserve 40,000 homes fell short of what the city needed. Now, Novara is in a position to do something about it as the city's new housing commissioner. Thursday's confirmation hearing allowed aldermen to air ideas that they want to hear her consider, such as
Number 1,
strengthening the Affordable Requirements Ordinance by mandating construction of family units.
Number 2,
Eliminating loopholes that allow developers to buy their way out of a requirement to build an on-site unit in gentrifying neighborhoods and perhaps creating incentives to do so. Up next, well, you know what that is after number 2, right?
Number 3,
That's right. Number 3, raising income limits for housing renovation assistance programs.
Number 4,
Discouraging the practice of demolishing 3 flats and replacing them with single-family homes. And finally,
Number 5,
encouraging basement, attic, and coach house conversions. Novara's 70-minute confirmation hearing drew 15 aldermen, including 5 freshman aldermen. Newly elected Alderman Matt Martin of the 47th Ward bemoaned significant decreases in affordable housing due to the loss of multi-unit buildings in the North Center neighborhood that he represents. Alderwoman Maria Haddon, newly elected to the 49th Ward, said that there are, quote, real gaps between where people are in our communities, between what they can actually afford and what's being built. And newly elected alderman of the 22nd Ward, one Mike Rodriguez, asked Novara how much the shortage of affordable housing drives the exodus from Chicago. Now, Ben, hang on tight here, buddy, because this is where it's going to get a little crazy. Because Novara, a person working directly under the mayor of Chicago, listened intently to all suggestions and embraced virtually every one of them.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, this is radical.
Whoa.
Like I said yesterday, D, I'm having an existential crisis here as I realize that the new mayor, Lori Lightfoot, is appointing people to positions of power who actually agree with the things I've been pleading for and begging for all these years. Not quite sure what to make of all this. Ultimately, you know, I assume it'll all go wrong somehow or other. It's generally that happy little sunshiny, optimistic view I have of life. But every single one of those points that you mentioned, D, has been talked about for the last, 20 years or so. And that Matt Martin, the alderman of the 47th Ward, that's my alderman. That's my alderman. He was on the show about 2 months ago. We got to bring him back. But what he's saying is absolutely true. It's just one fundamental aspect of life on the north side. And I've seen it in my life, folks, because when I moved to that ward way back when in the 80s, it was far different than it is now. It was much more working class. It was less. There was less wealth there. And yes, indeed, there were multi-unit buildings on every block, maybe 2 or 3 units that were rented out. And over time, I've watched so many of them get sold to a developer who tears them down, and then they build up mansions, I guess, that go for over $1 million. It raises the value of homes throughout the area, which thus jacks up the property taxes, which makes the area less affordable. And then it just moves the people, the renters out who are working class or poor, what have you. And so the neighborhood changes. You can just see it happening. I've seen it happen over the last 30 years that I've lived there. And I'm not quite sure what can be done to stop that. Well, I know what literally can be done to stop that. You tighten the laws that allow developers to tear down buildings, I suppose, but there will be such resistance to that. I can recall the resistance throughout the 90s and when developers who had the ear of key aldermen and members of Mayor Daley's administration, they would say things like, in this country, there's our rights of property owners is paramount. And so if a property owner wants to tear down his building and build up something, as long as it conforms generally to the zoning laws, we cannot do anything to obstruct it. And so we've seen the consequences of that attitude. I believe that Mayor Daley and Mayor Rahm wanted to encourage this as much as possible. It was all about the gentrification of the city of Chicago. And to a large degree, DeEd has been successful, particularly in the north side. So it's going to be quite a challenge for Lori Lightfoot and her new housing commissioner to deal with these trends.
But yes, it's true. No, I'm smart, you're not Mayor Rahm administration-like tactics when answering our aldermen here when they're on their concerns to housing. Listen to these responses from Novara, Ben. I'm really interested in exploring what we can do about that. What? What city are we in again?
It's not Mayor Rahm, Chicago.
She said she'd like to look at changes with accessory dwelling units, basements, attics, and looking at coach houses. And listen to this one. Displacement can occur via gentrification when you see higher income people moving into a place. What?
Yeah, whoa.
This is coming from a mayoral staff?
Yeah, it's a new world, huh?
But she also went on to say, but it can also occur via disinvestment. That's what we also see in many of our South and West Side communities that are majority African American. Novara told aldermen that's a public policy imperative for the city to address on both fronts.
All right, well, now you're talking disinvestment. And by the way, Carlo Rotello will be in the studio at about 2 o'clock. We'll be talking more about this in South Shore. The World is Coming to an End is the name of his book. Disinvestment, folks, it has to do with how the city invests its economic development dollars. And if you invest your economic development dollars in upscale gentrifying neighborhoods, you are going to accelerate the gentrification of the city in the city of Chicago. You're going to make it less affordable. That has been the policy for the last 30 years or so. It may be too late to stop that. The impact on the north side, as I said, but it's certainly not too late to more fairly and equitably spend our investment economic development dollars. And that, of course, is the TIF program, which is a program intended to help poor communities and is largely used to help the wealthy ones. That is life. And that has been life in Mayor Daley's Chicago and Mayor Rahm Chicago. So that's what I'll be really watching to see if Lori Lightfoot changes.
All right, moving on. Willie Wilson, you mad, bro? Former 2019 Chicago mayoral candidate Willie Wilson held a press conference this morning saying that he would like to meet with Governor J.B. Pritzker in regards to the newly signed state budget. According to Willie Wilson, the increases in the gas tax and license plate fees in the new budget hurt poor and middle-class voters. He said that so far his calls have gone unanswered. Here's the quote from Willie Wilson, quote, "Governor, I've sent you 3 or 4 emails. I've sent you a letter. I've called you 2 or 3 times. Your people have not responded back to me. The people that I represent that voted for me are asking to meet with you. Let's try to work some things out that mutually benefits all of us." Here's more from Willie Wilson on the negative effects of the new state budget. Keep in mind, Willie Wilson did recently vote for this guy.
No collusion.
And this guy.
Yay for our teachers! Yay for our teachers!
Illinois Governor Bruce Rauner. All right, here's Willie Wilson.
The poor is going to hurt the most in the middle class. The other one going to hurt the most. And that's my beef right there. I think that if you look into ways of spending and things of that nature and balance the budget and things of that nature, you can take care of it.
Ben Joravsky.
All right, listen, Willie Wilson, good friend of the show, has been on many times. In fact, I have to bring him on again. Again, he's basically a Republican. So this is what I would say to Willie Wilson. You're absolutely correct. When a government turns to things like fees and licenses that everybody has to pay, and there's one flat rate for everybody, it's a regressive tax that hurts the poor and the middle class the most. Absolutely, because the money means more to them. If it costs like $100 to get a city sticker, it's going to mean more to somebody who makes $20,000 to $30,000 a year than it would mean for somebody who makes $1 million. So you're absolutely correct. That's the essence of what's wrong with regressive taxation. It hits the poor the hardest. That's why I encourage you, Willie Wilson, and I know you're listening because you're a regular listener to this show, to join Governor Pritzker's campaign for a fair tax. You got to fund government somehow. All right, so the people in the neighborhoods that voted for you, their neighborhoods need help. Their neighborhoods need just like any other neighborhood, perhaps more. They need funding for their schools. They need funding for their streets, etc. You got to figure out a way to pay for that without resorting to regressive taxes. And the most regressive tax of all is the one that was just passed. Doesn't get talked much about, and that's the expansion of gambling in the state of Illinois. That is a sucker's tax, and it hit hardest at poor people who are looking to try to get their way out of their desperate situation. There was a story in today's today's Sun-Times about, maybe I'll talk about this with Romana, former Alderman Willie Cochran pleading that he not go to prison in part because he ran up expenses due to his gambling addiction. Interesting plea. I don't know if it'll work with the judge. So, yes, Willie Wilson, I agree with you. We are resorting more and more to regressive taxes, but the only way to get out of it is to go to a more progressive form of taxation. And that's why I hope you join your plea. Your addition to pleading with Pritzker to cut taxes and fee hikes that hit the poor the hardest, you also join him in his crusade for a fair tax. How about that, Willie Wilson? Join the fair tax crusade.
So there you are. Just like that, you're now in the know of what's going on in Illinois, and now you will have an answer the next time someone asks you, hey, what else is news?
All right, let me tell you something.
Okay, lay
something
it on
that Willie Wilson,
okay,
Governor Pritzker, and Neil Steinberg, the columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times. They all agree.
Wow.
You did a great job.
I love his work.
Give yourself a raise, taking out a petty cash. We got Romana sitting right here. We're going to bring her on when we return.
Read the Chicago Reader to get up to speed on what's what in Chicago. Culture, food, arts and entertainment, weekly concert listings, weekly event listings, the environment, travel. I can continue, but you get the point. And for all of you Chicago political junkies, raw weekly columns on real city politics from Maya Dukmasova and our very own Ben Joravsky. The Chicago Reader, free to the public in newsstands throughout the city and online at chicagoreader.com. Read it now and be a more informed Chicagoan.
Did you know that 40% of the people in Illinois opt to be cremated? Well, it's true. And Chicagoland Cremation Options honors their wishes by providing cremation services directly to the general public. Chicagoland Cremation Options provides an affordable, ethical, and easy cremation arrangement, whether in person or online. Save thousands and streamline the process by going directly to Chicagoland Cremation Options. It's a family-owned business operated by my good friend, Douglas Klein. Here's how you reach them. Chicagoland Cremation Options.com. One more time. ChicagolandCremationOptions.com.
But we got to get down to business.
Today's Ben Joravsky Show was brought to you in part by Chicago Architecture Center. Discover the breadth and majesty of Chicago's architecture on a Chicago Architecture Center bus tour. From bungalows to Bauhaus, our expert docents will share the fascinating stories behind our city's architecture. Book your tour at architecture.org/tours. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm actually on a bus tour right now. Oh my, look at that wonderful piece of architecture.
Take a chill pill, man.
Cirque du Soleil's Big Top comes back to Chicago with its latest show, Volta. Venture into a captivating voyage of discovery inspired by the adventurous spirit of freedom, where a surge of action sparks a high-voltage journey. Volta. Playing May 18th through July 6th under the Big Top at Soldier Field. Tickets at CirqueDuSoleil.com. Volta thanks their partners Hennessy Black and Champagne Nicolas Fayette.
Hey! Playing now at Steppenwolf Theater, the world premiere of Ms. Black for President. It's inspired by the true, that's true as in it really happened, TRUE story of Joan Jett Black, America's first drag queen presidential candidate. You know who created it, D?
No.
It was created by Tony nominee Tina Landau.
Oh.
And you know who else created it?
No.
Oscar winner Terrell Alvin McCraney. You know him, Moonlight.
Oh, yeah.
For tickets, visit steppenwolf.org. That's Steppenwolf, like the rock group from the 60s, .org.
Hang tight, millennials. Commercial break over. Welcome back to the Ben Joravsky Show.
Ben Joravsky here with me in the studio. Romana Hussein, she said something very funny right before Dennis said, welcome back. Anyway, so Romana is, of course, Sun-Times editor. Every Friday, the Romana Rundown right here on the Ben Joravsky Show. We go through the news of the day, the news of the week, and there's certain trends that keep popping up, Romana. Generally, men in power behaving badly is a frequent theme. Jussie Smollett is a frequent theme. The Chicago Cubs and their apparent determination to alienate everybody who's a Democrat from coming to a Cub game. I guess they think that's a good strategy to follow. It's basically what the Tribune has been following with its editorials for all these years. And R. Kelly. There's some certain stories that just keep appearing and reappearing. And again, to remind everybody, Romana was saying before she was an editor, covered the Cook County, the courthouse at 26th and California, so she knows about criminal justice. So let's start at the top. Men behaving badly, Romana, Judicial Inquiry Board
Nothing
complaint.
new.
Cop scolds judge who tried to kiss her back, sir. Oh my God. Just talk about this.
Well, that was
story.
just one of the incidents. So last fall, there was an assistant state's attorney who filed a complaint against a judge who basically started talking to his clerk in Spanish and said that, she's kind of like ignoring me. And then he made these are allegations, of course. He said, according to the prosecutor, the female prosecutor, she went to college with this judge. Mm-hmm. And he said something like, oh, she's acting that way because I didn't have sex with her, or maybe I did have sex with her. And according to what some people are saying is that when these two went to college, she rebuffed his advances, and so she filed a complaint against him, and this led to other women coming forward. And this complaint has been filed by the Judicial Inquiry Board, and this will lead to a hearing. And then that hearing could lead to, the judge coming off the bench. But he's been on administrative duties ever since September when this initial complaint was filed. Mm-hmm. So according to files that we saw yesterday, there was 2 more women that had stepped forward. The first woman, Porter, I believe, was in an elevator with him. And he asked her how much money it would cost to have sex with her. And later, I think, or maybe the same incident, he had mentioned, the woman, I think when he accosted her again, had said that, I have a boyfriend. And he's like, that doesn't matter. And that's the allegations in that one incident. Second incident is there was a police officer who was trying to give him a warrant to sign. Yeah. And he kind of ran, apparently this is allegations, he ran toward her to try to kiss her. And according to this, the complaint, it said that the officer extended her arm to prevent him from coming any further and loudly stated, "Back, sir." And she was basically using a method that she learned during police training for halting a potentially dangerous physical situation.
So, back, sir.
Yeah. And then I think, while she was walking to the courtroom to sign the office, to get the warrant signed, I think the allegations is that this judge asked her to touch his butt. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah, I know.
And she basically, this officer didn't make a formal complaint until she found out about the complaint filed by the prosecutor a few days ago. And then I don't know if you know, but this judge was also being investigated or was interviewed about this FBI investigation into 2 police officers. He basically had signed most of the search warrants tied to this case involving this officer who now is being investigated with another officer for stealing money from an FBI informant. And apparently this Judge Arroyo was friends with the officer, and he might have been in Colombia at the same time that this officer was. So, he's being, looked at in another situation, in another case. So it's an interesting allegations. I actually don't remember this judge. I was told by the criminal courts reporter who wrote this story, Andy Grimm, that he was a floating judge probably when I was there. And the latter incident in 2018 where he was making comments about the prosecutor. I think he had a courtroom at the time.
What's a floating judge mean?
A floating judge means they don't have an actual courtroom. So there's judges at 26 and Cal who actually have a courtroom, and then there's judges who don't have a courtroom. So they're kind of there's courtrooms on the first floor, but those are usually bond court. But from the second floor to the seventh floor, there's different courtrooms, and most judges have their own courtrooms. But there's a couple rooms where judges don't have like a home, so they kind of go in different courtrooms.
They go to whatever.
It's kind of like
if a judge is on vacation, then the floating judge can take his.
And they sit in that courtroom, and sometimes they'll have a call, and it'll be like, okay, between 2 and 4 o'clock, like this judge will have a call in that.
So on a tangent within a tangent, do you have to like work a certain number of years before you get your own courtroom?
I mean, I feel like, from what I remember, I never knew how it worked, but it felt like, judges who were kind of just like had just been appointed or voted in, like they were the ones who were floating around. Obviously judges who, it's not like Judge Vincent Gahn, who's, covered all these high profile cases, was going to be a floating judge. He'd been there for a while. So I kind of felt like, if you're a veteran, you have your own courtroom.
So, all right, help me with the psychology here. And I'm really struggling with this. I'm not trying to be facetious or anything. I'm really trying to understand this. Every day, judges, they hear criminal cases, complaints, where in many cases are incidents like this, which are clearly inappropriate. They have to adjudicate them one way or the other, determine, the legitimacy of the complaint, whether a defendant is innocent or guilty. And then to turn right around and allegedly do the very thing that they're constantly lecturing. You've sat through many sentencing hearings where the judge lectures,
starts scolding.
Scolding, that's the exact word. They scold the defendant. So what's going on psychologically here?
I don't know. I can't think. I would feel like in these situations, these judges must have, if a person's in a position of power, I think two things. One, they think they're above the law and that nobody's going to catch them because, traditionally, we hear about stories where women were sexually, harassed or abused and nobody says anything. The incidents involving the 2 alleged victims, they never actually filed a complaint until they found out that this complaint was filed with this organization. He probably thinks like, oh, I'll get away with it. Nobody's going to believe me. That's what I'm thinking the thinking is. And then the second way I'm thinking is like, there must be some sort of psychological problem with them. I don't know. Do you think you can say to an officer like, oh, touch my butt?
Yeah.
And nothing's going to happen to a police officer? I don't know. I just don't get it.
I know. That was a very bizarre, well, whatever. I just don't understand the psychology in any of these that would lead a judge to do any of these things, but particularly to a police officer.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's like maybe when a lot of these men are teenagers, they get away with stuff like this, and then they keep going, and it's kind of like a little pebble, and it keeps rolling, and it gets bigger, bigger, and they just like the positions they're in. People abuse their power all the time, especially men.
Yes, they do, and we're seeing this more and more. The evidence of this that goes on, and then it continues to happen. You know what I mean? You would figure like they would catch on, but no.
Especially in light of the Me Too movement, you would think men would be scared now. They are, right?
Well,
or like not to do like just be aware.
Yeah.
That women are paying attention and they're not going to take it anymore, or like there people are going to be more vocal about.
By the way, all the years, how many years were you at the courthouse?
I was there for almost 10 years.
10 years. So what was the atmosphere in your experience in terms of harassment?
It's very politically incorrect, for sure. People gave me nicknames, but a sheriff's deputy called me ISIS. That was his nickname for me.
To your face?
Yeah. But he
thought that was appropriate?
He was like, that's what I'm just saying. It's very like politically incorrect. And he was actually nice to, quote unquote, nice to me. So
he would say, hey, ISIS every day.
Yeah, he called me ISIS. He called me wacky packy because people call Pakistanis packy. And I'm like, I'm actually Indian. But yeah,
did that distinction matter to him?
No, he knew that. He goes, yeah, I know that. But it's definitely politically incorrect.
And so,
people would probably think it's the suspects walking around the courthouse that are really politically incorrect, but they're very polite. If they wanted to sexually harass you, they're very polite. And then the lawyers and everyone else is a little like less.
So when someone calls you, like when this guy calls you ISIS, what goes through your head? How do you deal with that?
It's when you're a person of color and you've kind of getting used to these names. And like I said, he's like being good natured about it.
Hey, ISIS! Whoa! How about those bulls?
ISIS, yeah. I don't know. He called me something. I mean, there was other things I was called too, but I'm sure I was called things not to my face, but some of the sheriff's deputies told me they gave nicknames to people that came in, reporters, and they told me what the nicknames were. But they would say stuff about other people. Like one person I know, they called her another sheriff's deputy used to call somebody that I used to work with Velma, like from Scooby-Doo.
Oh, okay,
like the glasses.
Yeah.
So most of it was pretty like harmless. At the end of the day, people. I know they're raised a little different in a different time. I mean, I never had anybody, people would make jokes, but, a lot of people confused me for being the Spanish interpreter everywhere I went. Like, even if I had the Sun-Times lanyard, they'd be like, I would sit in courtrooms and the judge would call me up and go, "Oh, okay, Spanish interpreter, why don't you come up here?" Yeah, all the time.
Your Honor.
I'm like, well... I took Spanish for 5 years, but I'm Indian. So all the time. I would get, people would ask me to come up and testify all the time.
That is hilarious, man. A Spanish interpreter.
Yeah, they go. So everybody thought I was a Spanish interpreter.
That's pretty funny.
Even after 10 years, like they would still call me.
Yeah, well, that's our criminal justice building, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. You know what they say in the criminal justice building, in the halls of justice, all the justice gets done in the halls. Well, anyway, that story is interesting. Judicial Inquiry Board complaint. Cop holds judge who tried to kiss her. I'm sure we'll be following this one for a while. And of course, speaking of stories been following for a while, Jussie Smollett. There's another Jussie Smollett update.
This week is, I guess you would call it slow. They released the 911 tapes that was made by the manager of Jussie Smollett, and when he had said that he was a victim of a hate crime, and the manager called, and I think he used a different name for Jussie Smollett. He called him like Frank Gaston or something, and then he explained what happened, and then he said Jussie Smollett didn't want to file a report because he was so shaken up. But then, eventually, obviously, we know what happened. So that was like the latest. There was a Smollett-related case that was up in court this week in Rolling Meadows. There was a young woman who used to work, I think, at a Home Depot, but then she had quit or is unemployed. But she was also charged in a disorderly conduct case. And the judge in that case had met when she was up to plead out. I think this was in April, the judge mentioned something about how it was unfair that, even though she, committed the same crime, it was I get allegations were less serious, but she was asked to do more than Jussie Smollett was. Jussie Smollett, as we remember, some of us remember, he had his charges dropped against him. He paid the $10,000 he had in bond, and he was asked to do community service, which he did before, but he was still able to maintain his innocence. So this young woman, she pleaded out yesterday. So our reporter, Stefano Esposito, actually said in the end, Candace Clark didn't get a Jussie Smollett deal. No, that was the lead. And she actually ended up after we did the initial story about the judge making the comment about how even though what she did was probably less egregious than what Jussie Smollett was accused of, she was asked to do more. And so this woman actually pleaded out yesterday, and she has to do a couple things. She has to pay back $1,200 in restitution, and she has to go to periodic court hearings, get a job, and either show proof of a job or do community services. And her lawyer, actually, he first spread about this case in the Sun-Times and decided to work for her for free. And so he made a comment, actually, his quote to our reporters: "While I'm happy that she has a disposition that will allow her to move forward with her life, clearly this case exposed that there is one set of rules for the elite, the ruling class, the connected, and another set of rules for everyone else." Yeah. So that was pretty telling.
All right. There's many reasons why the Jussie Smollett story lingers. People are fascinated with it, and there's always this notion that, well, we shouldn't be fascinated with stories that draw us in. Romana's like, we're all supposed to be better than those stories, but people must be reading and clicking on these stories.
I mean, we're told that every time I do post a story involving Jussie Smollett, we have a chart beat, computer generator, or it's like we have a screen, and I always see the Smollett cases at number 1, number 2.
Is okay.
So they do very well.
Yeah.
Those stories do very well. But I mean, I think, there probably can be some argument made that we're like, oh God, we're doing like every time this case, it's like never, and we're just doing every little minutia related to the case. It's like, it's bigger than that. I mean, there probably is, like I said, an argument made. Do we need to write something all the time? But at the same time, this is a case that still has a lot of unanswered questions as to how it was handled.
Yeah.
I think that's what, I don't know. As a reporter, that's what's intriguing to me. I'm sure there's little bits and pieces. I mean, TMZ is doing when Jussie Smollett moved in California, they did a story on him. And then I don't know if you saw, but Empire, I think they're writing him back in to the show.
It may save the show.
But
ultimately, it may save the show.
It's the last season.
And I always say this in terms of why it's significant in Chicago and criminal justice in Chicago is because it does expose, in my humble opinion, the double standard that exists. That lawyer is absolutely correct. There is a double standard. And part of that, we all know about that double standard. It's if you have money, you get one set of justice. And if you don't have money, you get another set of justice.
Exactly.
And if you have political connections, your connections can make phone calls to powerful people who should not, in my humble opinion, be taking those phone calls. And then it serves that political, think about this, Ramada, it serves the interests of people who despise Kim Foxx, the Cook County State's attorney. It serves the interest of Donald Trump lovers who...
Yeah, that's like a byproduct of this situation.
Yeah, so it's never going to go anywhere, folks.
No,
and
it's not.
I remain obsessed with it.
I bet even after the IG from the county's office comes out with the report, it's still going to go on.
The part about Empire writing him back into the screen, it's unbelievable. That's how cynical we are as a human
Well, they probably
species.
figure, this ratings will go back up again like it did when the show first came.
Absolutely. So. The ratings will go back up because of this controversy. It's like there was that old sketch on Saturday Night Live where they did a meter, and every time, I think Jesse Jackson was actually the guest host, every time he mentioned sex, the meter went up. So you just, anyway, it's Jussie Smollett. So don't act like people out there like you're bigger than Jussie Smollett's story, okay? You're obsessed with it too. All right, speaking of, oh my goodness, talk about interesting appeals by lawyers. Cannot let you leave without talking about Alderman Willie Cochran, former Alderman Willie Cochran, I should say, who is in a sentencing hearing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think he's already pleaded guilty, from what I understand, wire fraud, and he admitted taking some money, I believe. And so I guess his lawyer was arguing that he should not serve prison time because prison time really hasn't helped other aldermen do corrupt things. Which
It's an interesting argument, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's true, but there's a lot of people who are charged in criminal cases, and it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop drug dealers or people from murdering people. So are you going to stop sending murderers to jail? Well, because it doesn't really stop people from murdering.
I mean, I guess the larger question is if we're going to say that jail time or prison time is not a deterrent, okay, it clearly, I mean, obviously, aldermen have been going to jail forever, and they continually be corrupt. So if it's not a deterrent to the crime, and the crime itself was what? I mean, you took a bribe, so you did sully.
He took $14,000 from charitable 20th Ward Fund.
So
used it for personal expenses.
So do you feel as though then the issue becomes, are there other more, I guess it gets the whole heart of alternative sentencing, are there other more productive ways to quote unquote punish this guy that would help society as opposed to spending the money to put him in jail? What's your thoughts on that?
I guess probation, right? That would be it. But what would you suggest? Community service? Do you think community service has stopped aldermen from?
No,
you're just saying what would the alternative
be? In other words,
be?
like it's not. I don't believe that anything you do to him will stop other aldermen from being. I mean, they put Blagojevich in jail for 14 years for something that goes on all the time. You know, shaking down people for campaign contributions. So, and that has not stopped.
It's done in different ways, right? And
exactly.
Most people get away with it.
So what I'm saying is that I guess the issue that I'm raising is there a more a form of quote unquote punishing a corrupt politician in a way that would benefit society? In other words, is there some use you can put a corrupt Chicago alderman that would help people as opposed to just putting him in jail or prison for a couple of years?
I don't know. I'm trying to think. Make them I don't know, pick garbage on the side of the road and like live in a little, they're spending all this money to like live a lavish lifestyle, maybe like move to a 1-unit studio apartment. I don't know.
I would argue that having a corrupt Chicago alderman pick garbage from the side of the road would be more beneficial to society than putting him in a prison in Wisconsin or wherever. Club Fed or whatever. Yeah, isn't that the one in Wisconsin where they send them? Because at least you'll get the garbage picked up.
I can tell you this story. I remember when I was at City News Bureau. That was my first job, and I was assigned to cover City Hall with another reporter. And there was a former alderman who had been to prison. Larry, was it Bloom?
Lawrence Bloom. Yeah.
He came in. I don't know.
Larry
I
Bloom,
had no idea who he was,
Uh-huh.
but he came in. I guess he was supposed to be a progressive alderman, and
In those days, they called them independent reformers.
yeah.
Yes.
So I remember he came in. And then he left, and everybody was commenting on how like healthy and like he looked well rested.
Huh? Larry, you look good.
And I think they were just commenting and like, yeah, because I mean there are politicians who go to prison and they're not like obviously going to like a prison with other like hardened criminals.
Yeah.
So they come back and they get to work out and like so I guess everybody was commenting on how he looked, or
good.
I don't know if it was him or another politician, but there was at least 2 or 3 of those. Politicians who were jailed or spent time in prison who kind of used to just come to like the press room and they would talk to the the veteran reporters. Like they didn't really talk to me because they had no idea who it was.
They thought you were the Spanish translator.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, it's the lady that translates the Spanish. She doesn't even speak Spanish. By the way, Larry Bloom was the alderman of the 5th Ward, which is Hyde Park, South Shore, and as a transition, Carlo Rotello is in the studio. We're going to bring him on soon, talking about South Shore.
Oh, cool.
He may have been Carlos alderman, whether Carlos realizes it or not, way back when in the 70s. But before I let you go, we got to do a Cub update.
Okay.
Everybody know I root for whatever team is in the city of Chicago. So I'm not one of these demented Chicagoans who chooses
You
the
have
Cubs.
to pick one.
No,
I
you
think.
don't have to pick one. I completely
I
disagree
think if
with
you're from this era, you have to pick one.
Absolutely.
You can
vehemently disagree with this. Well, we could talk about this forever. I do not have to. First of all, I don't have to do anything, okay? But all right. But that.
Oh, you're those people who say, I'm a Chicago fan.
Yeah, I pretty much, I'm a Chicago fan. If they're in Chicago, I root for them. I'm a little weak right now on the Blackhawks, but, huge Bulls fan, love the Bears, Cubs, Sox.
I actually root for all the Chicago teams once they make it to the playoffs, but with the Cubs and Sox, I definitely don't like. I make it known that I don't really care for the Sox.
I love the Sox.
But I was very happy for them when they won the World Series.
Oh, that was nice
I was
of you.
rooting for them.
The Sox commented on that. Thank you, Romana. All right, but here's what I don't understand. At some point, this article in the paper, we've talked about this so much, because the Ricketts, the team that owns, they're the right wingers. They love Trump. They're bringing these Trump big shots to Chicago, and then capping it off with fun and games at Wrigley Field
with all the big Trump donors. I guess because of who I am, a child of immigrants and a Muslim, I don't have any problem saying that I'm not really a fan of Donald Trump. So, and I'm a Cub fan, so it's been very difficult for me to watch all this unfolding of events. But I have to say, as also someone who's a person of color and someone who's Muslim, I've kind of been raised, kind of surrounded by people who are pretty much anti-me, including, the owners of this paper. We've had owners who've said terrible things about different groups of people. I don't think that
not
it's just,
currently, previously.
Not currently.
Yeah.
Not currently. I mean, I can't. I used to not read the editorials for a while because they were really very. They talk about the Middle East. I remember reading some where they would compare the Palestinians, all Palestinians, to terrorists. So, I mean, there's been media owners that I can't stand. I mean, let's face it, Papa Ricketts owned DNA Info.
Yes,
you know what I mean? And I remember clearly at the time he had supported this anti-Obama film where, it's fine, he can have his political views, but I think it was a film that would just had a lot of misfacts in it.
Yeah, no, it wasn't the one that
I think it was
it might have been metrosexual.
And isn't he a birther? I mean, I just I don't know.
remember.
It's just like, so I mean, it was clear. I mean, Ricketts, I remember reading about Ricketts and being like, what? And then Neil Steinberg, I know we talked about this right before I came on the show. Neil Steinberg, our columnist at the Sun-Times, wrote something about how like the Cubs have been owned by right wingers since day one.
Yeah.
William Wrigley, I guess, was.
But this is really rubbing it in our
of
face.
Course.
This is rubbing. Even you allow the Trumpsters to come to your park and party.
Trust me, I find it appalling. Yeah. I'm just saying, and it's very hard. But it's very hard too because the Cubs have been the one team that I really care about in the city of Chicago. I like all the other teams, but I wait until I never watch the Bears until they make it to the Super Bowl.
Oh, we're going to turn you into a Bulls fan. But anyway,
I like the Bulls too.
Here's a comment from Dennis Culleton, who is a Ricketts family spokesman. One thing the family wants all Cub fans to understand, including you, Romana, while there are lots of people with various political views, everyone is welcome to come cheer on the Cubs. Subtext, yeah, you can throw your money out at Wrigley Field. We don't care as long as it's green.
Exactly.
But I don't know. Come on, Ricketts. You could just
But don't you think
yourself.
The players are different than the owners? So I support the players. That's it.
Okay.
And so far I'm a season ticket holder. I've only been to one game so far. So I'm probably going to fewer games than I did last year. Although the first game I had tickets to got snowed out. So,
it's really the Cubs are making it very hard for me.
Yeah, but don't you think a lot of owners?
Yes, we're run out of time, but I could talk for an hour about the idiotic investor in the Golden State Warriors who felt that he had the right to punch Kyle Lowry, who had gone at the guard for the Toronto Raptors. I know Dennis.
I think he was trying to gain his balance, right?
No, he ran into what happened? There was a ball that was bouncing out of bounds. Kyle Lowry running out of bounds to retrieve the ball to keep it from going out of bounds, crashed into the people who sit on the sidelines. This happens fairly frequently in an NBA
even
game.
I know that, yeah.
It's like the equivalent of a third baseman jumping into the crowd to catch a ball, and you land it. So you have to be wary. You got those high-priced seats. You're sitting right there. You got to be worried about it. This dude was sitting like two seats from where Kyle Lowry went. Just felt compelled to go punch him. I don't know what he was thinking.
Yeah, I read about that too. But I was more focused on the Beyonce incident from the same game, I believe.
You mean when she was just sitting there?
Well, no, she was sitting there, and then the owner from I think the Golden State Warriors, his wife was trying to talk to Jay-Z, and she looked really annoyed, and she kind of shoved. It looks like she's shoving her. You have to watch it. That was the clip
I missed that.
That was the clip that
everybody all over those kinds.
So then this woman ended up getting death threats because everybody loves Beyonce, and they're like, Beyonce just looked very annoyed. But it was kind of funny. But then I read about that, and so there's the previous incident you were talking about, and I think he's like called a minority owner.
Yeah.
He's been banned from the Golden State Warrior games, and I think he has to pay a fine.
$500,000, which, if we point out, he's worth over $2 billion.
Yeah.
So
that's going to be nothing.
You
went
to Niles West. You're very good at math. You could figure out that $500,000 to a guy worth $2.5 billion is not a lot of money.
Nothing.
It's it's sort of like chump change, but anyway.
So a lot of these owners for media, for sports, they're not necessarily people I find that savory.
I know you don't like to think that your money is going to them.
It's very difficult.
So Romana, I can't remember. Are you going to be with us next Friday? Or
No, I'm going on vacation.
Are you going on vacation? We've granted you vacation. We've approved your vacation. So wherever you're going, have a wonderful vacation. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Somehow we'll carry on without you next Friday. Have a great time, all right?
Thanks for having me.
All right, Carlo Rotello is on deck. The World is Always Coming to an End is the name of his book. It's all about South Shore. We'll bring him on when we return.
The Ben Joravsky Show is supported by the Northwestern Summer Writers Conference. Now in its 15th year, the 3-day conference held in Chicago features a diverse array of workshops, speakers, discussions, and readings. Learn more at sps.northwestern.edu/writers.
For the top 1%, then the bottom 92%, 49% of all new income goes to the top 1%.
Hey, everybody. What you're about to hear are the piano stylings of Jeff Manuel. Man, listen to Jeff go. Jeff Manuel has been playing piano around Chicago for years. He's played for conventions, for celebrities, played in basement bars with blues bands. He's played at prestigious social clubs, fine restaurants, and in the intimacy of private homes. Book Jeff Manuel at jeffemanuelpianist.com. Don't worry, I'll spell his name at the end of this commercial. You know what Chicago Magazine said? They said that Jeff Manuel is, quote, as comfortable with Chopin as he is with Cole Porter. He's excellent and his performance is joyous. He offers an elegant stream of compositions and interpretations that entertains the mind but won't hurt the ears. To hear more of Jeff Manuel's work and to book Jeff for your next event, go to jeffmanuelpianist.com. I'm going to spell it out for you, people. J-E-F-F. M as in Mary, A, N as in Nancy, UELPIANIST.com. Take it away, Jeff Manuel.
Well, the biggest Jeff Manuel fan on the planet, Ben Joravsky. Hour number 2 of your Ben Joravsky show for Friday, June 7th is just moments away. But before we get into that, we would like to thank the following unions once again for jumping on board and bringing back the Ben Joravsky show. First up, it's the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, not Aerosmith, Local 126 and District 8, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 9, and the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150. A giant thank you to those unions for jumping on board and helping bring back the Ben Joravsky show. And, of course, today's program is brought to you by our good friends at the Chicago Federation of Labor. Hour number 2, let's go. Uh-oh, there we go. Thank goodness it is Friday, June 7th, and live from the Chicago Sun-Times Chicago Reader Studio on Racine Avenue, this is the Ben Joravsky Show. In this hour of the program, professor and author of The World is Always Coming to an End, Carlo Rotella will join us, and it's the Ben Joravsky Show debut of Samina Mustafa. And now your host, Chicago Reader columnist, Benny J. Ben Joravsky.
Yes, indeed. Ramana Hussein has left the building. Samina Mustafa is going to come to the building, but at the moment, right there, sitting right across the table from me is Carlo Rotella. He's a professor of English at Boston College, but he is not from Boston. He is from Chicago, and he wrote a book, The World is Always Coming to an End, Pulling Together and Apart in a Chicago Neighborhood. Talks about South Shore we'll tell you where South Shore is. We'll get into all that in a little while, but raises a lot of important issues about gentrification, disinvestment, how policies shape neighborhoods, and just sort of the changes that are relentlessly happening in the city of Chicago that he lived through. And that many people are living through right now. So we got Carlos sitting here. We're going to bring him on. But before we do that, do you got an update for me?
Absolutely, I do. Hey, I was out of the room for that last segment. Were you talking about sports earlier?
Oh, yeah, man. As soon as you left the room, started talking about that goofy owner of the Golden State Warriors.
Benny
Thought he
J.
could punch someone.
That's sort of political. I guess it'll work. Right. 2 updates here. First off, right now posted on both Ben Joravsky Show Facebook and Twitter pages at Benny J Show, BENNY, the letter J, Show. We also have an email address, by the way. I always forget to mention it. BennyJShow@gmail.com. If you have any comments, complaints, great guest suggestions, whatever it may be, send us an email, by the way. But right now, posted on both Facebook and Twitter pages, it's the latest column from our very own Ben Joravsky. The title, Defending the Indefensible. Ben, tell everybody what they'll learn when reading your latest work.
Oh, yeah. No, I love this column, and it sort of relates to the general themes that we'll be talking about with Carlo. It has to do, of course, with Ed Burke, the former chairman of the City Finance Committee, and the way he used his power as the chairman of the Finance Authority, the Finance Committee, to shake down business from a developer who had that big old paw out looking for $18 million in TIF money. Carlo, I don't know if you know about the TIF program in Chicago, but it's essentially the chief economic development program in the city, and it's widely abused. It's intended for low-income neighborhoods, South Shore would obviously be a community that should be benefiting from it, but it's largely used for upscale gentrifying areas. So it's a complete, it's a reverse Robin Hood, if you will. And Burke was shaking down this developer. And I raised the issue. If the program that is intended to help most people in the city of Chicago is of no use to most people in the city of Chicago, then how could you say Burke is wrong for trying to squeeze what he could get out of it? And he was just trying to do what everybody in the city of Chicago would like to do, which is get something from a program that they're supposed to benefit them. So I got my tongue a little bit in cheek as I point out how this particular program is so corruptly run.
So there you are, everybody. Go check out that article after today's show, all right? If you're
show.
listening right now, don't go reading it right now.
No,
after today's show, okay? Come on. Once again, it's posted on our Facebook and Twitter pages at Benny J Show and at the Chicago Reader's website, chicagoreader.com. Okay, Donald Trump may have outdone himself on Twitter this afternoon. Move over issues we currently have in America. Step aside problems presently happening on planet Earth, because on this beautiful Friday afternoon, President Donald Trump is trash-talking the moon.
The moon?
The moon, that's right. Now, we all know how our president operates by now. He sees something on Fox News, then he tweets about it. Today, Fox Business host Neil Cavuto, not sure, I don't watch it, he discussed NASA's plans for a 2024 moon trip. I guess that was enough to inspire our president. I currently have Donald Trump's Twitter page open in my browser. Just hang tight. Let me scroll over to it. Okay. We're on Donald Trump's Twitter page. Okay, here we go. This is Donald Trump here.
For all the money we are spending, NASA should not be talking about going to the moon. We did that 50 years ago. They should be focused on the much bigger things we are doing, including Mars, of which the moon is a part. Defense and science.
Happy Friday, everybody.
Did he say the moon's a part of Mars?
Yeah.
Carlo, can you help me with this? I know you're an English major or an English professor, not a scientist, but...
I'm not going to even attempt to go near.
All right, okay. We'll keep it to South Shore. We'll stay out of outer space. Donald Trump has lost his mind, folks.
I'll keep it posted on Twitter for his next rant about Jupiter, but
okay.
We're looking forward to it.
All right. Very good. Carlo Rotella, thank you for coming in. I appreciate it, for stopping by our humble little studio here.
Me.
All right. The World is Always Coming to an End is the name of the book. Before I ask you what the title refers to, just tell folks, if they're interested in seeing you, you're going to be making a couple appearances around town, where you'll be in the next day or two.
So tomorrow at noon at the Printers Row Lit Fest, I'll be doing a panel on South Shore and on the book. All I know is that it's at the C-SPAN stage.
Okay.
At the Printers Row Fest.
And you know how to get there. That's what counts most of all. All right. The World is Always Coming to an End. What does that title mean?
So that's something that a real estate developer named Alan Hamilton said in 1969. He was being interviewed by the Daily News. The neighborhood was just in the throes of turning over from a white neighborhood to a black neighborhood. He had not only developed a lot of property on 71st Street, which is a big commercial street, but a lot of the business owners were his tenants. And he made this little speech when asked what he thought of the transition. And he said, look, you know, when the Irish came, the English thought it was the end of the world. And then when the Jews came, the Irish thought it was the end of the world. And then the next thing he said is, we are black now, which is an interesting thing for him to say. And he was basically telling the business owners, look, don't panic. Black people's money spends just as well as white people's money. The first black families moving in were actually, on average, had a little more money and a little more education than the white families they were replacing. So that all sounds very enlightened and long view of him. But then he ended up selling off all his property and evacuating 71st Street and South Shore, being part of the capital flight that followed upon white flight. So I thought the complexity of what he was saying gave a nice perspective on the play between the neighborhood always changing, there's always some kind of succession going on, and that there's a fair amount of persistence, that you know, these same processes repeat themselves in different iterations over and over.
Well, and by the way, was Hamilton himself black?
No.
So he said, we are all black now.
He said, we are black now.
We were black now, yeah. And now, so when you say the world is always coming to an end. It suggests that there's different kinds, end has different meanings. Like an end in one case, when a neighborhood goes, let's say, from being Irish to Jewish, or wait, it was reversed, Jewish to Irish, I can't remember which one, is different than the end, quote unquote, end that happens when a neighborhood goes from being, white to black.
Well, I think the way I think about it is, instead of thinking about a neighborhood, I think about a neighborhood order, a particular layer. And so these layers, they sort of emerge and they become dominant, and then they tend to recede over time. The transition from white to black is often taken as this kind of special, apocalyptically different transition. But in a lot of ways, it resembles the others. And now, having gone back and spent so much time in South Shore interviewing people, a lot of people who got to South Shore right about when my family did, 1967, a lot of longtime black residents are talking about the end of their South Shore. And they're not talking about a new racial group coming. They're talking about being squeezed from both above and below, being squeezed from above by gentrification, by white people moving into the neighborhood, and being squeezed from below by poor people moving into the neighborhood. That second group is very present in the neighborhood. The white gentrification is sort of always rumored, always about to happen, never quite happens. But so it's the idea of the world coming to an end, I think, is more that it's a neighborhood accrues in layers, and that layer that is home to you, is the world to you. And people become very familiar with it, and it's very disorienting to feel the ground shifting under your feet.
Yeah. And
whether it's a racial difference or a class difference or whatever it is.
Yeah, or an ethnic difference. Now, talk about your family. Let's get a little personal a little bit. Did you say 1967, did you say?
Yeah.
So how old were you in 1967?
I was 3. My folks were grad students at the University of Chicago. They were immigrants who had both lived through war. My mother in Spain and Barcelona, my father in Africa and Eritrea, because he's Sicilian and his family was there. So when they were looking for a place to move, there was all this panic about South Shore, and the neighborhood is changing and the crime rate is going up, but their bar was pretty high on what trouble looks like, sort of bombers bombing your house.
Yeah.
And so what they saw is what everybody sees in South Shore, a lot of house, 20 minutes from downtown, right next to the University of Chicago, very close. They were planning to send their kids to the lab school, which they did. They were getting their degrees there. They were both employed full-time, teaching, my mother at St. Xavier, my father at the city colleges. And so, they saw what every successive group has seen in South Shore, which is a really nice place to live.
Yeah.
And they bought the classic, historic Chicago bungalow at 71st and Oglesby for, I think, $22,000. And they moved in there in a moment when a lot of new families were arriving. It's just that almost all of those other new families were black. Essentially in the book, I go back to that moment to think about growing up there in the 70s and sort of the formation of Black South Shore, and then I've been returning for the last 15, 20 years to see what happened to that world, that first cohort that moved in. And a lot of those people are still there, still in those bungalows, have been there for 50 years. And think about, how has it matured? What's changed?
And Oglesby, help us out now. So the 71st Street is how far south it is. How far east or west is Oglesby?
Is just 1 block west of Yates. So if you drive to the end of Lakeshore Drive and then it bends and becomes South Shore Drive, that if you go straight, you're on Yates. So that's where the South Shore Cultural Center is. That's where right at that intersection, that's where Barack Obama's first campaign office was. That's where the 5th Ward Alderman's South Shore office is. It's just at the end of 71st Street, right when you get to the cultural center.
Yeah, so folks, we're starting to go in. If there's an east side to Chicago, it gets further east as you go south, because the city sort of bends under the lake going toward Indiana. But this is sort of like the east side of Chicago on the south side of Chicago. All right, so let's talk about this. You're 5-year-old or 6-year-old Carlo Rotella. You're going to the lab school, which is in Hyde Park, and of course that's private school. The kids, it was set up to take care of kids like yourself, whose parents were either professors or grad students in Hyde Park at the University of Chicago, and you're living in South Shore. Are you experiencing your own sort of culture shock as you're growing up?
Well, when you're 6, 7, 10, everything seems normal because
that's all you know.
That's the way things are, right? Yeah. I became more aware of it over time, and part of what the book is about is this idea that the world that you think has always been the way it is it turns out it was always being thrown together, 5 seconds before you showed up and is already falling apart. And if you know how to look, and retrospect is one way to look, you look back and you can see newer orders emerging and pushing their way through. So in some cases, that would be the kids I knew from the neighborhood, where were they going to go to high school? They were going to go to South Shore High, or a lot of black families sent their kids to Catholic school because they didn't want them to be in public schools, including a Muslim family we knew, a black Muslim family who sent their kids to Catholic school. So as a kid, you become more and more aware that there's these sort of big, grand-scale transformations going on, but they all seem like normal life to you. You're still sort of going through your routines, playing, pickup games, playing pickup basketball in my case, and sort of getting around the neighborhood and exploring, and the kind of stuff you learn in your neighborhood. What good music is, who to emulate, those kind of things that you learn as a kid, right? So I had 2 sets of those things. I had a South Shore version and I had a school version. But there are a bunch of kids from South Shore at the lab school.
Now, so when you were making your rounds on your bicycle and playing basketball, et cetera, and you're interacting with black kids who live in South Shore, was there an assumption when you met a black kid from South Shore about who you are? In other words, did they look at you and, I don't know, are you a Puerto Rican, or did they make any kind of assumption about who was this guy whose skin color is not exactly the same as theirs?
Well, there's usually, there's lots of mutual misrecognition that happens in places like Chicago. But, the thing is, I wasn't a holdover from white ethnic South Shore. It never occurred to me that it had been a white neighborhood until I started reading. I read the Studs Lonigan novels by James T. Farrell, and I remember sort of the shock. I'm probably 16. It's like, wait, this is a book about a white guy who moved to South Shore to get away from black people. How's that even possible? So there is some misrecognition, but also, and this is one of the things the book tries to grapple with, is we talk about and think about race as this absolute divide. But one of the things that South Shore really raises is the question of how are we going to figure out the class divide and the race divide. So there are ways in which other middle-class kids, most of whom were black, recognize me as a middle-class kid, right? And in some ways, that's a really powerful identification. And in other ways, you're the white kid, like on the playground or whatever. It didn't seem like as big a deal as it maybe seems to people, seeing it from the outside. And then, as opposed to the thing about ethnicity is that there's this sort of odd category for people with an Italian name, right? That there's a set of, I don't know, cliches or tropes that the culture has come up with that sort of is like a subcategory of white people that goes that's Italian. I'm half Spanish, but we don't have a category for Spanish people. There's no way to be Spanish in American culture, but there's an infinite number of incredibly cliched ways to be Italian. So it was easier that's an easy pigeonhole to get put in.
George Carlin, the comedian, has this funny bit about being a redheaded Irish kid in a neighborhood that was mostly black, and he talks about that. It's an old bit. Carlo was probably way before your time, but he talks about how every white kid who ever hangs around with black kids starts talking like the black kids. You never find you never find it reverse, like the black kids start talking like the white kids. So when you were growing up in South Shore in the 70s, did you find yourself sort of being like part of black culture? Was that the dominant culture?
No, so you had a series of choices about the kind of character you were going to play in different kind of public situations, and that was just a character I was never interested in playing. Maybe I was because I wasn't any good at it, or it just seemed like a bad idea. Yeah. So you sort of double down on your goofiness and your otherness and just leave it at that. There's certain advantages to doubling down on your goofiness and otherness. That is, if you're playing basketball and like you're wearing glasses and have like the concert, like the Grateful Dead concert shirt with the flannel shirt over it, and you manage to block somebody's shot, it's infinitely more crushing and painful for that person. And then you reckon, like, how can a universe have produced this result that is not a malign universe? So there's a way in which just doing everybody the favor, including myself, of not trying to be cool. It seemed like a good idea. But there, it's sort of interesting to see the white kids in the neighborhood each sort of coming to their own understanding of, how am I going to reckon with this? And it's, a lot of that has to do with the moment in which you live. In the moment in which I lived, there were these big kind of cultural landmarks that you had to deal with. Were you going to listen to what is now called classic rock, or were you going to listen to funk and soul? And I didn't really want to pick either, so I found my way to the Checkerboard Lounge and started getting into blues, which is connected to both of those things, but separate from them. Are you going to play basketball, or are you going to play baseball, or you had sort of choices to make, and making those choices, you do encounter with the dominant culture, and the dominant culture in South Shore was black culture.
Yeah. So you were picking and choosing. Think about it. You chose basketball, so you didn't choose baseball.
Yeah.
You chose blues, so you didn't choose funk or soul or classic. Although you could have done all three. It's not like
I know.
You're not going to get in trouble. It's like not returning a library book. You're going to get fined.
When
I'm
you're
sorry.
12, you feel like you need to choose, and then later it's like, no, you can just pick all of them. Right?
All right. Now, your book is very aware of all the profound changes that have happened in South Shore, and that are consequences of larger policy matters that people outside of South Shore are dictating.
Right.
As a kid, I presume, were not aware of this, or were you the real kind of precocious kid who in the 70s was already following, in the early 80s was following Chicago politics? And
not precocious. I was very dreamy. I was following, what was happening in Conan the Barbarian stories. And, that's where I was getting most of my information, was from Pulp Fiction. No, I came to this stuff later. But the other way to think about it is growing up there is sort of doing your legwork. And seeing these things happen, which later you find names for. So, I'm in 47th grade at this point. I've been in school for my whole life, and now I've got names for some of these things. Deindustrialization, and the big one in the book is the hollowing out of the middle class. Yeah. The South Shore I grew up in was a middle class world, and it was a first house neighborhood in the sense that South Shore was a place where families moved up from working the middle, or if they were already in the middle, they aimed higher. Right, Michelle Obama's family. She grew up a few blocks down the street.
She's your age.
Exactly my age. Yeah, is a perfect example of that. Right, move up and then you aim even higher. And the South Shore that I returned to, it in many ways has many very nice blocks. In many ways, still a really nice neighborhood. Is no longer a dominant middle class neighborhood. It is a neighborhood of haves and have-nots, and there's not a lot of moving up going on. And that's I think the big distinction. And now, sort of looking back, I can see the difference. That I went to school. One of the characters in the book is the son of a cop who owns a big 8,600 square foot house in the Jackson Park Highlands, which is one of the nicest neighborhoods in Chicago. It's a chunk of South Shore, 4x4 block chunk.
Jackson, but that's roughly.
That's Jeffrey to Cregier. It's right
67th.
67th to 71st is right where the Obama Presidential Center is.
Yeah, it's a beautiful neighborhood.
Right, so that kind of moving up, or the more common kind, which is that you've got there used to be all these signs outside bungalows in South Shore that said "Proud Union Home." There were so many of them that there was a prefab sign you could buy that said "Proud Union Home." You don't see those signs anymore, and that kind of moving up. The big bulge in the middle class that happened in the 1950s and the 1960s, and with the black middle class even into the early 1970s, I grew up in a moment when that families were still feeling the momentum of that boom in the middle class, but coming back and talking to people, I'm seeing that middle class aging out and not being replaced in a lot of ways. Yeah. And that's that middle class of people who had one job their whole life, work for a big company or work for the government, have a pension. And South Shore is full of cops, nurses, firefighters, postal workers, bus drivers, but then also lawyers, doctors, professors. And it's that bungalow dwelling middle, which is sort of Chicago's best insurance policy for retaining a middle class. There's these 80,000 historic Chicago bungalows in this city. And that's really its best bet for holding on to people who are neither haves or have-nots. Right, and we're somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and there's an argument that I've heard advanced by many black people in the city of Chicago, and it's sort of counterintuitive, but I hear it all the time, and that is that integration has effectively been far more devastating to communities like South Shore than anybody recognizes, because back in the day when there was segregation and black people could only live in a limited number of neighborhoods, that meant a community like South Shore had a thriving, not just middle class, but like sort of like a professional class, if you will, like the doctors, the lawyers, et cetera. But once the restrictions against where black people could live sort of faded and broke down, then that just meant that the upper class, I've heard this argument so many times. Do you subscribe to that?
People made that argument. A lot of people I talked to, or many people I talked to, made that argument. I don't think it explains South Shore all that well, because it is a persistent fact of racial housing segregation that makes it inevitable that when the black middle class moved into South Shore, they would be followed by the black poor. So that the white haves, if you want to think of it that way, have been much better at putting distance between themselves and have-nots. And that's because of the persistent fact of racial segregation. South Shore is over 95% black. It's not an integrated neighborhood. And it is not, as I said, gentrifying, or if it is, it's gentrifying at like drip speed, right? And so I think that argument, and I see the logic of that argument, and I see why that argument would be compelling in some cases. But I think in the case of South Shore, it doesn't explain the neighborhood all that well. And I think what does explain the neighborhood well is the fact that there aren't that many neighborhoods for black people to live in Chicago, and South Shore is a really nice one. And it also has a lot of apartments in it, in walk-up apartment buildings, so that the South Shore you've got now is, for instance, above the average in number of PhDs and above the average in the number of dropouts. It's got these 1,000 historic Chicago bungalows, actually 1,011, and also some bigger houses, and has some high-rise apartment buildings with great views of the lake. But it also has more housing vouchers and more evictions than any other community area in Chicago, or has in recent years. So it's not a typical neighborhood. And actually, in some ways, it's a better blueprint or a better canary in the coal mine for the country than it is for other neighborhoods, in the sense that this is what it's going to look like when we get done shrinking the middle class down. We're going to have haves and have-nots, and not a lot of movement back and forth between them. It just so happens that the haves and the have-nots are all black in South Shore, which means that it's more likely that they live right next to each other, sometimes on the same block, sometimes separated by just an alley. There's an alley west of Cregier that separates the Jackson Park Highlands from Parkside. So you've got Section 8 buildings on one side of the alley and sort of small mansions on the other. You see those kind of things in South Shore. You don't see them elsewhere in the city in the same way.
Another refrain that's in your book as well is talking about how when the projects were torn down, that caused an influx of people into South Shore, and the neighborhood was damaged by that. I've heard this. This is another refrain I hear all the time from people in chat. I hear this all the time too. The neighborhood changed when they tore down the high rises. How accurate do you think that is?
So that is a story I heard a lot. That's a really powerful narrative in the neighborhood. And it is true that South Shore received more of those families in other community areas, but it's not a huge number. It's not an enormous number. It's a couple of hundred families. And I think part of what happened is the narrative lumped those families together. And so the argument there is not completely intolerant in the sense that, so this is an argument coming from middle-class homeowners, and that they're not, or let's put it this way, not all of them are saying the problem is poor people. Some of them are saying these families were dumped here with no services and no chance to make a go of it. So I've heard that narrative a lot, and I think what happens is that small group gets lumped together with a much, much larger group, which is everybody who holds a housing voucher, everybody who's poor. And so if you look at the numbers, just over 1/3 of South Shore's population is under the poverty line, and like 60% is under the bottom cutoff for the middle class. So if 60% of the population of your neighborhood is a problem, then you're misdefining the problem, right? That's the majority in the neighborhood. That was not true in 1980. It was a majority middle-class neighborhood in 1980. And that's a transformation that these stories get sort of put on top of to try to explain. But yes, the plan for transformation and the tearing down of the projects in the 90s did bring some families to South Shore. I actually tracked down some people who had lived in the projects or grown up in the projects, and some of them are in the book. And the people I talked to were variably, some of them were doing really well. In fact, I isolated a group who were working hard to sort of create more community in South Shore. So the narrative doesn't fit everybody all that well.
Before you came into the studio, we were talking about a news story earlier in the show. The housing commissioner, newly appointed by Mayor Lightfoot, had a hearing in front of the city council, and the aldermen were venting, talking about all the changes that are the gentrifying part of the situation. You talk about the hollowing out of the middle class, disinvestment, and then there's also gentrification. And they were making suggestions as what she could do to make Chicago more affordable. And so there's this notion that Chicago is becoming unaffordable to middle class people, working class people, and we're just going to see it turn into some kind of version of Paris where all the poor people move out. How do you think all of this relates to a community, a South Side community like South Shore?
Well, so you see some of that happening, but I think that if you were going to try to find some policy solutions to keep that middle, and it's a pretty broad middle. We're talking the kind of upper working class all the way up into the middle class. South Shore would be a good place to do it. That is, it's compared to the rest of the lakefront, it's affordable. There's a lot of apartments, and there's all these bungalows, and there's also some interesting people, thinking about ways to do this. And one of the opportunities to do it is actually the Obama Presidential Center. Because of the building of that and because of the controversy about it, there's a little more opening for policy solutions to try and slow down gentrification that might be connected to it. So there's sort of an opening there. There's a leverage opening there, and there's a guy named Calvin Holmes, the head of the Chicago Community Loan. And he's got all these interesting ideas for how you could do that. And there's fairly technical ways to keep people in, people who, sort of the technical definition of one technical definition of the middle class is people who make between 2/3 and double the national average income, right? How do you make a neighborhood affordable for those people? Right, that's a different set of solutions than how do you make a neighborhood affordable for poor people.
Yeah,
right.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's TIFs, as you said, and there's even kind of higher than TIFs. One of the problems with South Shore is that its commercial streets, 71st, 75th, 79th, are really desolate. A lot of vacant storefronts. Yeah. Not a lot of places to sit down and eat. And so encouraging those streets to come back, it would have to be this two-pronged thing where you're working on housing because it's basically a bedroom community. But you're also working on these commercial streets. Because right now, the way it works is everybody who can afford to gets in the car to do everything.
Yeah, no, it's insane. It's
including to send their kids to school.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that crazy?
I mean,
Chicago, they think they live in the suburbs. Every parent drives his kid to school now.
But that's in part because you get a lot of house, so then you make the deal, right? And a lot of people I talked to said, look, I made this deal and I made it with my eyes open, right? We're not going to shop in the neighborhood. My kids aren't going to go to school in the neighborhood. In fact, we're never going to be in public space in the neighborhood. Yeah. We're going to be in the car or at the house. And when we leave the house, we're going to get in the car. And that's in part a function of this class divide, but it's also a function of the fact of these desolate commercial strips and these public schools with bad reputations.
Well, our next guest, Samina Mustafa, knows a little thing about real estate in the city of Chicago. I can tell you this, Carlo, I've seen the transformation of so many neighborhoods in the city. I've been lived here since 1981. And on the north side, I've seen neighborhoods that the commercial districts lagged behind tremendously. Like I'm thinking of the stretch of Lincoln Avenue that you go past the Belmont, go to Addison. I mean, it just like all around it. It was boomtown. People buying up, building proper real estate property. Real estate prices going up on residential. But man, they're vacant storefronts. So there is a lag. Even, it's not just a South Side phenomenon. It's just a lag.
Yeah. And one of the things, I live in Boston, and
you just said that.
Yeah.
Dude, oh my God, this guy grew up in South Shore. Did you hear that? He said Boston, man.
I live in Boston, and people who live in Boston or New York have trouble picturing though the lack of pressure on the south side or on the west side. Yeah. So South Shore's population was over 80,000 in the past. It's under 50,000 now. So nothing is happening fast in that same way that it happens. There's no booming going on one way or another. And that is part of what might create the possibility for some intelligent policies to when it does happen, to slow it down and to keep the people who are there somewhat in place.
Well, you're very optimistic if you use the word intelligent with the city of Chicago. You've obviously been out of town for a long time. Anyway, his name is Carlo Rotella. The book is The world is always coming to an end. And one more time, tell folks where you'll be tomorrow, is it?
The Printers Row Lit Fest, and there's at the C-SPAN stage, I'll be doing there's going to be a panel with myself and a few other people talking about Natalie Moore from WBEZ and others talking about South Shore and talking about the book.
Well, it's a great book.
And where can people find it?
If I knew the address, I'd tell you.
Oh, okay.
Oh, with a Printers Row?
Yeah.
Oh, Printers Row is in
I'd
the
go to
South
Printers
Loop,
Row.
right? Mina's like nodding her head. It will be, I'll do this. Okay. It is just west of Michigan. So we're talking around... Yes, Dearborn Station. So like 800 South.
That would be about right.
And where can people find the book to buy?
Oh, where can people find the books?
Wherever you can find a book, the usual places, bookstores, Amazon, etc.
All right.
Go to a bookstore, folks. That's just me speaking. I think Carlos like, hey, man, just buy the book. I don't care if you buy it online or in a bookstore. Carla Rotella, thank you very much for coming by. I appreciate it, all right?
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Samina is on deck. She's ready to rock and roll. We're going to bring her on when we return.
Hey there, producer Dennis here. Thanks for finding and listening to the brand new Ben Joravsky Show. All right, so here's how this works. The Ben Joravsky Show live streams on the Chicago Sun-Times YouTube channel Tuesday through Friday, 1 until 3 p.m. Once the show is over, you can listen to the replay on our YouTube channel, or we throw it online for you to download by 4 p.m. Where can you download the Ben Joravsky Show, you may be asking yourself? Well, you may be asking yourself a fantastic question. You can find previous Ben Joravsky shows and guest interviews through several outlets. The Chicago Sun-Times Online, chicago.suntimes.com, the Chicago Reader Online, chicagoreader.com, and wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, pick one. Just search for The Ben Joravsky Show. J-O-R-A, V as in victory, S-K-Y. So, let's recap. Tuesday through Friday, 1 until 3 p.m. Live streamed on the Chicago Sun-Times YouTube channel and downloadable by 4 at chicago.suntimes.com, chicagoreader.com, and wherever else you listen to your favorite podcast. Yes, the Ben Joravsky Show is back. We're live and downloaded. Tell your friends and enjoy the rest of the show. All right, today's Ben Joravsky Show is also brought to you in part by Green Element Resale. It's located at 6241 North Broadway in Chicago, and guys, it's badass. All right, listen to this. Furniture, appliances, lamps, books, clothes, electronics. It's a thrift shop, but it's the only thrift shop in Chicago that helps bring you the Ben Joravsky Show. So if you are ever on Broadway between Granville and Devon, stop in, tell them thank you, and go check out Green Element Resale, 6241 North Broadway, and find more information at greenelementresale.com. Go to Green Element Resale, check out some products, and save money. Welcome back to the Ben Joravsky Show, live from the Chicago Sun-Times.
Yes, we are indeed live and making her Ben Joravsky Show debut, at least in this new location.
Is my mic live? I don't think so.
It's on.
Okay, I don't think these are on.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
How about now?
Now we got it.
There we go. Last guest thought it was too low. This one thinks it's too high.
Hey, man, the guest is always right. That's what we learned at the Ben Joravsky. The guest is always
glad to be back with Ben and Dr. D.
Yeah, not a doctor.
I know. And we're talking about Medicare for All, so we need a doctor, right?
Yes, we need a doctor. Doctor my eyes, man. We need a doctor. Is that your T-shirt, Medicare for All?
Yeah, Medicare for All.
Do you have another one? That looks really cool.
Huh?
That's
no,
a cool
I don't.
T-shirt.
I bought it in D.C. From the People's Action. That was one of the organizations. I was in D.C. about a month or so ago talking about Medicare for All. We did a bunch of actions, and we'll talk about it. But tomorrow in Chicago.
Wait, hold that thought, because Dennis, do you have an update?
Oh.
Absolutely, I do. We have an quick update here. And in moments, we're going to do a little segment that we like to call According to Breitbart, where we find out what our alt-right friends are talking about these days. Hey, we got to be in the know, all right? But before we do that, I want to remind everyone to download our weekend Benny J bonus interviews. These are download only at both Chicago Sun-Times and Chicago Reader websites. Oh, and wherever else you download your favorite podcast. By the way, millennials, thanks for hanging tight with us. We're now on Spotify.
Oh, yeah. The millennials are like,
aren't you? Isn't that your demo?
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, he's the worst millennial. I mean, I swear, I am a better millennial than he is.
Are you still using a rotary phone? Is that your?
I just got rid of it.
You're the rotary phone millennial.
I just got rid of my rotary phone. But yeah, we're on Spotify. Every millennial's like, why are you on Spotify? I don't know, but we figured it out. So we're on Spotify. Tell your friends. Here's our bonus interview lineup for this weekend. Saturday, and available by 6 a.m., WBEZ reporter and our resident demographer, Alden Lowry, will sit down for a one-on-one interview with Ben Joravsky. Sunday, also available by 6 a.m., Joseph the Ambulance Man, G. Varghese, probably butchered that, of Our Revolution. And Monday, available by 5 a.m., political strategist, the one, the only, Del Marie Cobb. Be looking for them on
DMC.
TMC.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Whoa.
That thought of that. I've been an interviewer for years. Never thought of that.
My mind's blown. Show's over. I can't continue. And so those are our Monday downloads here. Look for them online. Our Benny J bonus interviews. All right, now time for According to Breitbart.
If Roy Moore was guilty, if he was at the mall hitting on this 14-year-old, 40 years ago in Alabama, there's a lot of mamas and daddies that'd be thrilled that their 14-year-old was getting hit on by a district attorney.
According to Breitbart.
All right.
I haven't heard that one in a while.
It's been a while.
Memories, yeah.
Yeah, sorry to bring this back. All right, first, the disclaimer. It's mainly for Ben Joravsky. The following update does not reflect too well on Joe Biden, Grandpa Joe Biden, a.k.a. Ben Joravsky's favorite candidate.
Warming up.
All right, so here we go. According to Breitbart, Joe Biden's national security advisor participated in secretive early Russia probe meetings. Ooh. Colin Kahl, who served as vice president, Joe Biden's national security advisor, participated in the secretive and highly compartmentalized early principles meetings that took place at the White House to discuss the controversial early stages of the Russia investigation. And this is according to a book called Russian Roulette, the inside story of Putin's war on America and the election of Donald Trump by one Michael Isikoff.
All right, so what's... listen... help me, Samina. What's bad about that? So in other words, a gentleman who's now working for Biden's presidential campaign, I presume, was working in the Obama White House.
Right.
I know you're not a huge fan of the Russian event. I remember, just people know.
No, it's. Oh, go ahead.
In my other existence, when I had another show, Samina was a regular guest. We talked politics
in a parallel universe.
In a parallel universe that blew up. Well, I was in that universe.
Yeah, you're at that station, WCU are fired.
Yeah, WCU are.
Move over, DMC.
Yeah, get out of here. That station.
It's part of healing, right? Yeah. It's part of healing.
We're working through it, okay? We're still working through it. But Samina was part of that station for a while. Anyway, but WC, you are fired. And Samina would come on all the time, and we would talk politics. And as I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong in my memory, you were not a strong advocate of the Russian investigation.
No, that's not. I mean,
my memory is inaccurate.
No. I think it's not that. It's that we can talk and chew gum at the same time. Is we can talk about the Russian investigation. We can also talk about healthcare for everyone. Okay, we can do both. We can do both things.
I agree.
It's not a binary. We're not in a world where we have to choose. And so that obviously, I think when these stories like this come out, my own opinion is that they're trying to do, it's funny, they're trying to do a both sides thing. Like they did it about like in the case of Breitbart, they're doing like, oh, they were colluding with the Russians. They were like, I think they're trying to imply something.
Well, they do two things. It's two messages. It's one, they were doing it too, but they're also trying to say that they're trying to send a message to Trumpies that this whole investigation began as a political ploy by the Democrats to undercut Donald Trump's presidential campaign. And so, do you know the guy that's running his campaign is the guy, that's the message they're sending, which, like, I don't know why that would. I got a lot of problems with Joe Biden as a candidate, but that would not be at the top of the list.
Yeah, but I mean, they obviously are going after Biden. He's the front runner. It makes sense to paint him with that story and not somebody else who's not maybe, as dominant in the polls. But again, it goes back to like, this is an important discussion. But again, like, what else happened in 2016? How many field workers were in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania? Yeah. Let's really talk about some things that we can account for and some things that we can't always anticipate.
All right, now let's just jump right to the heart of things. I've really become convinced more so. I think I told you this when I was talking to you on the phone before the show. Of course, it was so loud. I don't know if you heard a word I said. I was walking by the expressway. But I've become utterly obsessed with this notion that the Democratic Party, part of the reason they lost in 2016 and the reason they will lose if they don't follow what I'm about to tell them to do, which of course they won't because they never listen to me, is that they are not pushing and advancing a Medicare for all plan, a single payer plan. I am absolutely convinced that the American public is ready for it. They want to hear something definitive,
right,
without, wishy-washiness around the edges. They don't want to hear people tell them they can't afford it. They just saw Donald Trump plump $16 billion out of who knows where to pay off farmers not to produce goods, to justify his silly trade war, which is ignited, and yet we can't afford health care.
Yeah, it's always we can afford military budgets, we can afford all these things, but it's whenever it's actually something that can help people, it's how are you going to pay for it. And Medicare for all is one of these things that actually is hugely popular amongst independents and Democrats. 85% of Democrats, 70% of independents, and 52% of Republicans. And I don't know if you caught this clip that went that came out of Bernie Sanders' town hall on Fox News, but they sort of thought they were going to do a gotcha moment on Medicare for all, and all these people raised their hand like, yeah, we would love Medicare for all. And then they said, oh, but when you really dig into it, people start losing the support diminishes. And here's the problem. We have people on the right who are making that argument, but we have plenty of people who are, allegedly on the left. And so even before I got here, there was an article that was shared that was AOC calling out Pelosi because there's a bill in Congress that's talking about negotiating prices for prescription drugs. Now, the bill that Pelosi wants to push would restrict that ability to negotiate to 25 drugs. 25. I mean, that's not enough. I mean, that is literally protecting the profits of the pharma industry. Do you know how much money the pharmaceutical industry spent on lobbying in 2018? $281 million. That's roughly 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress. Representative Mark Pocan just shared that on his social media recently. That is a staggering amount of money. And what does that go to? It goes to preserving their profits while people are dying. It's not complicated. People are dying because they're rationing their medication or they can't afford it. I was trying to find this statistic, but 30 million folks, roughly 30 million folks don't have insurance. About 40 million folks are underinsured. And there was a number recently, and I want to say it's north of 125 million people. Americans are financially insecure on their health care. And you hear the statistics all the time that people could not they couldn't handle a $400 emergency medical or emergency expense of any kind. Mm-hmm. And, the other day I had a fall. I ended up going to the emergency room. Do you know what my copay is? $150 just to walk in the door. Yeah. Just to walk in the door.
And you have a plan.
And I have a plan. I have insurance. I actually have very good insurance. So I don't have to
It's not that good if it's $150 just to walk in the door.
But that's what I'm saying. Yeah. I have excellent insurance, and just to walk in the door is $150. And so that's what is really at stake here. What we're doing tomorrow to kind of get to I'm not want to bury the lead here, is we're working Physicians for a National Health Program, which is a single payer advocate. It's doctors who want to see a reform to the system. 56% of physicians polled said that they support a single payer system. Physicians for a National Health Program, Jane Addams Senior Caucus, National Nurses United, which is probably the most well-known well-known union that's been pushing for single payer, and a host of other groups, including Our Revolution, are going to be coming together tomorrow. We're going to be protesting outside of Blue Cross Blue Shield's office on Randolph. It's on 300 East Randolph. And then we're going to march to the Hyatt Regency, where the AMA is holding their convention. Now, this is something people can understand, Blue Cross Blue Shield, they're a huge insurance company. They're making massive profits. Health insurance CEOs are making the most, they're at the top of the heap when it comes to CEO pay. But people don't know this about the AMA, the American Medical Association. They have a terrible history. They would not admit black physicians until the 60s. their refusal to accept black physicians meant that those physicians couldn't get residencies because it was a requirement that they needed to be members of the AMA and then their county medical society, have memberships in their county medical societies. So the AMA maintained Jim Crow in healthcare. So that's one. When Medicare and Medicaid came around, they decried that as socialized medicine. And now they are the one of the founding members of something called Partnership for America's Healthcare Future. Sounds nice, right? It's an anti-Medicare for All lobby. Blue Cross Blue Shield's a member. Pharma, the lobbying group for all the pharmaceutical industry, is a member. These are groups that are coming together, pooling their resources to block Medicare for All. And when you go to folks like Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer, I mean, there was an article out maybe a month ago said that she was telling industry folks, we're not going to push on this Medicare for All. Don't worry, we're going to protect you. This is a case where the Democratic leadership is protecting, they're going on the side of corporations and not for the side of consumers and patients. And this is one of those cases where it's like, yeah, why should we trust you? Why should we vote for you when you're going to be against what, frankly, drove us to the polls in 2018?
Yeah.
Think about it. Every single person said healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. The GOP lost their majority in the House because of constantly trying to repeal Obamacare. Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things where it's not complicated. People have used the phrase like, healthcare is a purple issue. Everybody has a body. Everybody needs healthcare. Yeah. It's not complicated. And for people to be this fragile, I mean, about 6 weeks ago, I said I was in DC with the People's Action, and we actually did an action in the offices of Partnership for America's Healthcare Future, and then we went to Mitch McConnell's office, and we said, we need you to hold a hearing on Medicare for All because you are responsible for people's debts. Here's something that people don't know. The CDC actually reported, I'm gonna have to look at. There was a Harvard. It was a Harvard study that said 45,000 folks died from lack of insurance. Or it might have been the CDC. I've got them switched, but the number was 45,000 folks died because they didn't have health coverage in 2018, and about pretty typically 40,000 people died because of firearms. Now, 2/3 of those firearm deaths are suicides. Just doing the math, 45 versus 40, more people die because of lack of health coverage. You add those suicides in there because Medicare for All would cover mental health.
Yeah.
That's roughly 200 deaths a day.
Yeah.
The question to ask Democratic leadership, Republican leadership, how many people are you willing to, or how many deaths do you want to be responsible for?
All right. Now, listen, you're preaching to the choir right now.
Right.
And really preaching to the choir now. And I'm going to read you just a headline from an opinion piece in my beloved Bright One, home delivered every day. And then
can you show those listeners that newspaper, please?
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Good look at that, listeners.
I wonder what building we're in, you guys.
The Sun Times.
I have no idea.
And there's my Bright One clock. Okay,
it's great.
Yeah.
Have you seen the France Spielman show?
Yeah.
No,
it's on Sun Times. Go check it out.
Yeah, all right, there we go. All right, but
you're a good company man.
Yeah, good company man. But in my beloved Bright One is an essay that I didn't agree with at all. But it's headline: Democrats, keep your eyes on the prize and forget about impeaching Trump. All right, now that's a totally different issue. I'm going to put it aside. I'm not going to talk about impeachment with you right now, but I'm going to say here is the overlap. Anytime a Democrat speaks in dramatic terms about some kind of significant change, there is always immediately a counterpunch from a quote-unquote pragmatist. They call themselves pragmatists. And sometimes they're Republicans chortling, saying, please do this. So in the case of Medicare for All, there'll be two headlines. One, the pragmatist who wants the Democrats to win, saying, I agree with you that I think this is something we should shoot for, a goal we should shoot for, but it'll never happen. And you have to realize that by pushing for it, you're just going to enable Donald Trump to win again. If you want to get those swing voters, you got to drop your big dreams. It's just going to hasten the reelection of Donald Trump. And and then you get the other reaction of the Republicans saying, oh my God, those Democrats are at it again. They're guaranteeing that Donald Trump's going to win. Just keep doing it, Democrats. This is just like this instinctive sense. This is like conventional wisdom in American politics that if you push either impeachment in this case or something very practical, Medicare for all, you're going to lead to doom. Do you believe that people really think this?
Yeah, no. This is why having new voices and new leadership is so important, because when you're just talking to the consultant class and the big corporate and 1% donors, yeah, that's their mindset. They can't think of a world where there's really systemic change. If I haven't read the book, but the author of Winners Take All, Anand Giridharadas, has this theory, which is all of these philanthropists want to throw money at stuff to feel good about, but they don't actually want anything to change. This is just, put Sackler, call this the Sackler Gallery, whatever, but don't notice the fact that there are 200,000 people dying from the opioid crisis. Like, that's the kind of nonsense thinking.
The Sacklers are the people who run the
Purdue Pharma.
Yeah, and they give a lot of money to art institutes. Go ahead.
Right. And so that's the kind of thinking. It's, we are, and it's also incredibly condescending. Let's think about it. Like, it's like, we know better. We know it's best. We should slow this down. And it's offensive. You aren't talking to people who are dealing with this every day. I mean, there was a woman who told this incredible story. We were standing outside Mitch McConnell's office, and she said, my cousin got cancer, and she had to fight with the insurance company to get the medication. And they finally agreed to send it to her, and it arrived 3 days after her death. I mean, that is happening over and over and over again. Again, how many deaths do you want to be responsible for? And so that is really, like, that's where we're at. This is not you can talk about all these other things. 45,000 people dying is unacceptable. Mm-hmm. And think about how many people are really shortening their life expectancy, aren't getting mental health care, aren't getting their medication. And this is real. People feel this every day. It's not an abstract concept like a hearing in Congress. It's personal.
All right. So the strategy in 1993 or 4, when the Clintons took over, was to have a national health care plan. Insurance companies were against it, helped defeat it with a really malicious, deceitful advertising campaign. So fast forward to 2009. Barack Obama says, I'm going to learn from that because I'm a smart guy. I'm going to bring insurance companies into the process so they will not be fighting us.
Right.
And they succeeded, I got that in air quotes, with Obamacare. And so what has changed? Samita, there's going to be, the pragmatist's argument is rooted in the notion that if you try to cut the insurance companies out, they will come out swinging.
Oh, that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's exactly what the Partnership for America's Healthcare Future is about. It's insurance companies, it's drug companies. Unfortunately, they have the American Medical Association, which, by the way, they only have 15% of physicians as their members, so that they don't speak for all physicians. They are pooling their money. They have the resources. This is, so yeah, and they're going to keep doing it. The AMA, essentially, it's in their bylaws to oppose single payer. That's how deep-seated this has been going on for decades. It's well before Clinton. It's well before Obamacare. And they will do anything to preserve their profits. But at some point, this is why it has to be a bottom-up movement. We're not going to get the people in Washington or the CEOs of healthcare companies to give up their huge bonuses. This has to be a people-driven movement, which is why we're doing the rally tomorrow, and we're having these conversations. And we're trying to educate folks, like, here is what's happening. People are dying. We can save, the Libertarian Mercatus Center calculated that we'll save $2 trillion over 10 years. And then you have Democrats saying it's not economically feasible. I don't know, guys. That sounds like fuzzy math to me.
What do you mean by saving $2 trillion?
So you would actually save, because here, right? Okay, going back to the prescription drug conversation, Medicare right now cannot negotiate for drug prices. So we have you're preserving the profits of drug companies.
So when you say, you mean the cost to a consumer overall.
And think about it, like, do you know, like if you go to, I'm assuming you're in good health, but what if you had to go and get an x-ray at a hospital?
Yeah.
Do you know what the price of that is to go to, say, like Northwestern versus Evanston? Do you know if they charge a different price? There's no transparency because there's no like sort of set pricing. There's no way to negotiate. There's not the like if you was going to buy a Sony TV versus a Panasonic versus a Mitsubishi, you know exactly what the price is.
Yeah.
You as a consumer have no information.
All right, that is Samina Mustafa. I'm Ben Joravsky. Take a break. We'll be right back after this.
Today's Ben Joravsky Show was brought to you in part by Chicago Architecture Center. Discover the breadth and majesty of Chicago's architecture on a Chicago Architecture Center bus tour. From bungalows to Bauhaus, our expert docents will share the fascinating stories behind our city's architecture. Book your tour at architecture.org/tours. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm actually on a bus tour right now. Oh my, look at that wonderful piece of architecture.
And for the record, I love puppies.
It's Chicagoland's adult entertainment playground. It's the world-famous Admiral Theater, 3940 West Lawrence Avenue. The Admiral is homegrown from Chicago, and it's the most conveniently located club in all of the city. 15 minutes from the O'Hare Airport in downtown Chicago Loop. Voted Chicago's best strip club, the Admiral has showgirls galore and a variety of adult entertainment shows. The world-famous Admiral Theater, open every day from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m., 3940 West Lawrence Avenue. For events, showtime, and other information, visit AdmiralX.com. Must be 18 years of age or older to enter.
Hey, playing now at Steppenwolf Theater, the world premiere of Ms. Black for President. It's inspired by the true, that's true as in it really happened, TRUE story of Joan Jett Black, America's first drag queen presidential candidate. You know who created it, D?
No.
It was created by Tony nominee Tina Landau.
Oh.
And you know who else created it?
No.
Oscar winner Terrell Alvin McCraney. You know him, Moonlight.
Oh, yeah.
For tickets, visit steppenwolf.org. That's Steppenwolf, like the rock group from the 60s.
Hang tight, millennials. All right, everybody. The Ben Joravsky Show has some news here. After 5 years in Andersonville, Murray and White have made the difficult decision to close their doors. But everything in the store is on sale. Notable sale items: Voluspa and Nest Fragrances brand candles are 20% off. Well, they may be 20% off because I've learned something about our host, Ben Joravsky, in the last few weeks. This guy loves candles. Oh, my God. Whoa. Ben, tell him your favorite candle scent.
Cannabis.
Cannabis-scented candle. Doesn't even make sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
You light a candle to get rid of the smell of cannabis. And what's the other flavor?
Peppermint.
Peppermint.
Yeah, peppermint.
Peppermint candle.
Wait. Cannabis candle is just cannabis candle. Get it? Cannabis candle.
Yeah, I mean.
Alliteration. Ever hear of it?
I mean, yeah, that was awesome. It's alliteration.
Cannabis candles.
Notable sale items: Voluspa and Nest Fragrance brand candles might be 20% off. Ben may have bought them all. These lines can rarely be found on sale, so while 20% isn't the largest discount, lovers of both of these popular candle lines have been buying them up, like Ben. All rugs are 30% off in store and new orders through June 1st. All floor samples through all floor sample furniture, 30 to 50% off. Antique furniture pieces, 40 to 50% off. Pillows. Yeah, I heard Ben Joravsky does not like pillows at all. They're 40% off. They'll be available. Picture frames.
You sleep on those candles.
Yeah. On the cannabis candles.
He gets high off those cannabis candles. Listen, guys, a lot of stuff is on sale at Murray and White. Unfortunately, after 5 years in Andersonville, they have made the unfortunate decision to close their doors. But act now. Head to Murray and White. You may not find candles. Maybe talk to Ben, see if you can buy them off of them. But go to Murray and White. Welcome back to the Ben Joravsky Show. Mr. Joravsky, take us to the weekend.
All right, that super cool music means we're coming down to the end of another super cool show, but it's not over yet. Samina Mustafa is sitting in the studio. And by the way, not only does she know a lot about Medicare, not only does she know a lot about politics, not only does she know a lot about commercial real estate in the city of Chicago, she can play a mean piano. Ladies and gentlemen, Samina Mook.
Play chopsticks.
Oh, can we go back to your conversation with
Candles?
with Carlo?
Carlo,
No.
very good memory. How you
with-
plucked Carlo out of that? You remembered his name.
Oh yeah.
Or you see the book?
Carlo? No, I didn't actually see the name. I just remembered.
Good book, folks. Good book.
Because you brought up something like we're totally switching gears here. Exactly. You were mentioning all the storefronts on Lincoln Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Something I'm thinking about, that Lincoln bus, that number 11 Lincoln bus. Remember that?
Yeah, when they cut it.
Yeah.
Then they brought it back, right?
And no, but it's not like it doesn't go south. It doesn't go past those businesses.
Storefronts.
Like it doesn't go past like I think it actually stops at the station. It doesn't go past the Western Brown
I
Line.
can't remember if they brought it back or not, but anyway.
They did. There was a test,
Yeah,
but it was
okay.
only during the day.
I see.
So we got to
It's
call
just
Matt.
a test.
We got to call Matt Martin and
Yeah,
see what he can
Alderman
do.
Matt Martin,
Yeah, we
newly
gotta call.
elected.
Yeah, but I mean, like those. It was interesting to hear Carlo talk about the commercial corridors that have been hollowed out and haven't come back. It's really interesting. I'm thinking about all these things because I watched the first 2 episodes of When They See Us. Have you seen this?
No.
You don't know what I'm talking about.
No, but
I've heard about it.
Yeah, I was like, dude, have white people heard of When They See Us?
When they see us, I don't know.
So, okay, we're totally switching gears. We're all over the place. So Ava DuVernay.
Oh, yeah. When They See Us. Yes.
Yes.
Central Park 5. But
The
yes.
Exonerated 5
That is
her
correct.
new her new hashtag for those
Mhm.
folks. It's interesting because it kind of a lot of folks have been talking like they don't want to see it. It's sort of like traumatic. They don't want to see it, but like it got me when Carlo was talking. I was like, think about how much of the larger trends, these sort of policies like redlining and not sort of supporting businesses by in communities of color and even minimum wage fights and all of these like sort of big sweeping things that we talk about and how they show up in neighborhoods like South Shore and things like healthcare, which again to me they're part of a larger civil rights conversation, which is we're talking about equity and justice when we talk about things like Medicare for All, because we had things like the New Deal, and in so many ways there were programs that just excluded, the Black communities, and those policies were not truly universal. And so when we talk about things like Medicare for All, part of it is saying like, no, we're not going to make the mistakes of that happened in the New Deal. There were some amazing things that came out of it, but that's why people talk about a New Deal or the Green New Deal, because it says let's recognize how these programs didn't account for that. And we can correct that today because we know better. We know what was, and part of it was kind of negotiating things where, whether it was Southern Democrats or whatever, but like that's what's so frustrating about today is like, which party is the party that is truly about equity and justice?
Yeah.
Which
Well,
one is it?
yeah.
Honestly, I don't know.
Well, I would say the Democratic Party is far more about equity and justice than the Republican Party, if for only reason this. The Democratic Party is the only place you can go to if you believe in those greater values, a greater good, and have any chance whatsoever of seeing them enacted. There is nobody vaguely resembled with the Republican Party right now who will stand up for a Medicare for All plan, who will stand. I mean, I could do the whole list of it's
so that's true, but then they stop short because they're doing this. They're trying to play both sides. They're trying to curry favor with corporations and the wealthy and saying we're on your side, we're on the side of the masses. It's like you can't
have them both. And it was funny. I had this conversation. I talked about this earlier in the show with a person who I'm not allowed to identify because every time I see this person,
Dennis and I,
he always says, "Don't quote me." You know, he's a political strategist of the Dem persuasion, DEM persuasion. And so don't quote me. First thing he says, hey, how you doing today? Don't quote me, but blah, 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 blah. Anyway.
Sounds like a nice guy.
Yeah, but he's a shrewd guy, shrewd political operative. and he was talking about what just went down in Springfield with the various initiatives, the gambling initiative, the reefer initiative, and so forth. And he drew a distinction between opposition that is culturally based and opposition that is financially based. And so what he meant by that was, in the case of reefer, there was really no financial interest at play blocking the legalization of reefer. I mean, if anything, the capitalists could make money off of it once it happened. But there was sort of cultural opposition to it. People have been fighting the culture wars going back to the 60s and are having a hard time dropping that war. We're still resisting it, okay? But when it came to the gambling bill, there were two forces who had financial stakes at it. Like if you wanted to gamble online, if you wanted the ability to bet on sporting, I don't know if you follow this stuff. It's a huge fight that went down. So if you want the right to gamble online on a basketball game, all right, that's a whole industry. And that the casinos' interests in the state of Illinois do not want that expanded online right now to everybody because they want the exclusive control of it. So it's a financial fight. Do you follow what I'm saying? When it comes to Medicare for all, it's a financial fight, but they're going to come up with a way. Those sneaky so-and-sos will try to come up with a cultural way to tap into it, like they're getting something that you're not getting.
Oh, there will be many ways to do that. And you're already seeing it in some ways with this whole, fight over whether it's abortion access, if it's, health services to the transgender community. It doesn't matter whether it's undocumented folks. It doesn't matter. They will find some way to shoehorn their narrative into that and say, or just, what they've been doing since Reagan, excuse me, is this concept of fraud, that there's this mythical person who's, gaming the system, and we have to watch out for those folks. And then they don't pay attention. I actually had this conversation with my doctor. It was really interesting. Here I am, on the exam table, and I said, I was asking her about Medicare for all, and she said, well, what about that? There's fraud. And then she goes and tells me that she went to the University of Chicago for like a checkup or some kind of procedure. And because she was in the professional building next to the hospital, they charged her for a day in the hospital. And I said, look at you. You're already telling me that you're worried about Joe Blow gaming the system when the University of Chicago, with its billions of dollars in endowments, is actually overcharging you. That's who you have to worry about. Wage theft is in the billions. This kind of shenanigans are in the billions, not just one individual. Let's talk about systemic problems versus the one-off.
And does your doctor not see it as a problem when a university or a hospital, quote unquote, games the system to make more money? Is your doctor a woman, did you say?
Yeah, she is. Yeah.
So I just want to get the pronoun right. So she does not see it as a problem?
Oh, no. When I pointed that out to her, it sort of didn't click right away.
Yeah.
But I was like, don't worry about that. This is a bigger issue. And so and then it goes back to the American Hospital Association is part of this partnership, the American Medical Association, all of these entities that have every financial incentive to keep the system the way it is are going to fight it. That's clear. We know that. That's why it's about saying to the folks in Washington, and as insofar as we can do some systemic changes at the local and state level to fill in the gap while we get to the federal level, is to say no, you aren't going to be. We're going to get rid of you. You don't support this. You aren't standing with me on the most basic thing I need. Healthcare is a human right. You don't stand with me. We're going to get rid of you. And so these are the kinds of issues that people will use to primary folks, will use to fund an opponent, or Medicare for all. Like Pramila Jayapal, she is the author in the House of the Medicare for All Act of 2019. She started a Medicare for All PAC. I mean, this is a point on which to activate people because they get it. They get it. It's very personal to them. You don't have to like tell someone like, oh, what do you think about, the war in Yemen? Like, it's a terrible thing, but they're not there, right? And these are all awful things that people should care about, but it's not, there's not as much of a leap. People understand that when they go to their doctor, what the conversations are, what they worry about. I mean, I remember having to, go for a procedure in December and having to go back for a follow-up in January and then having to pay the deductible 2 months in a row. That was a hardship. That was hard. That's an everyday occurrence for folks. So, I mean, this is not like...
No, I understand. Listen, and the powers against it are going to be strong. They're going to be profound. I just believe that the time has come for the Democrats to just stand up as a party. And you know what? And I just saw Joe Biden. This is interesting. I know you're a huge Joe Biden supporter, Samina. Just kidding. But Joe Biden right now is top of the polls. I understand it's early. But he's number one in the polls. I thought last poll I saw 32%, something like that for Joe Biden, and Bernie was second with 18, something like that. Anyway, Joe Biden's top of the polls. The other day, he announced that he was still for the Hyde Amendment, which bans Medicaid financing of abortions for poor women. And then there was some blowback. Well, overnight, he transformed himself, and now he says he is against the Hyde Amendment. All right, well, people are allowed to evolve. Some evolutions are faster than others.
He loves Joe Biden. Why? I don't know.
Oh, my God.
I don't know why.
God.
So do you think, as unlikely as it sounds, that Joe Biden will evolve? He'll see polls, or he'll get strategists to tell him, Joey, this is the way to beat Donald Trump, that even Joe Biden will be for Medicare for all?
Joe Biden's a bad example. There will be folks who will evolve on this issue. And when pushed, here's the thing, at the end of the day, this is what I've realized. None of these folks actually believe in anything except to maintain their power. There's no foundation. There's no moral compass. There's no, this is my red line. No, just want to stay in power. That's it. So if they feel threatened, if that's the only way to get to these folks, then that's how we have to do it.
Well, I got to tell you, Samina, we're a long way away, and you and I know will be obsessively following this.
Yeah,
I'll be bringing you into the studio to talk about these issues as the campaigns unfolds. But the Democratic convention in Milwaukee will be in, I presume, July of 2020. So it's about a year out. And the Democrats are going to have to get on that stage and deal with the issue of health insurance as a party with a unified theme. I do not believe they can go into the 2020 election the way they went into the 2016 election, where they were split, where there was one faction of the Democratic Party, the Bernie faction, let's call them. They were ardently supported Medicare for all. And there was another faction that was telling him, don't be realistic, don't ask for too much, you're going to ruin the election, grow up, all the things that they say. I don't believe that Democrats can do that. And that means if Joe Biden is the front runner, then, if he's the nominee, then as he's the front runner now, he's going to have to evolve on this issue.
Right. And it's kind of like the 92 election again. It's like, don't forget about healthcare, right? That was like one of the things that Jim Carville kept saying.
It's the economy stupid.
Well, there was the economy stupid, don't forget about healthcare, and change or more of the same.
You're right.
Change or more of the same was the third thing. So it's like...
It's a genius.
But it's like...
And he forgot about healthcare, by the way.
Yeah, but that's the thing is like... And think about where we were even in 2015 and 2016 in terms of people's awareness of this and how problematic the current system is. And again, as you talk to people more and more, they realize, like, they say, 180 million people, you're going to throw them off their employee-based insurance. And then you ask people, what's your experience on your employee-based insurance? They're like, I ration care all the time. I can't afford my deductible. And you have had a ballooning of things like copays and deductibles. So it's like, this wasn't even the same conversation a couple of years ago. It's certainly not 10 years ago, right? So it's part of an education. It's not turning on a switch on and off. It's conversation by conversation and saying to folks, okay, this isn't working. We need to have a major transformation this is not an incremental change moment. This is not something we do drip, 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 and let the insurance companies keep their profits. This is not that moment.
All right, very good. You know what? We've come to the end of the time. I'm not going to ask you an impeachment question. When I suggested I ask you, you said, "Oh my God!" So I'm going to ask you that we'll talk impeachment the next time.
Okay.
You come in, and I'm really happy to have you back in the rotation. Love talking politics.
Yeah,
with
no,
Samina
it's
Mustafa.
great to be back. Thanks so much.
And Samina Mustafa, I should have mentioned this. She ran for Congress. I didn't mention this when she came in because I was so excited about talking about the Medicare for All. But in 2018, the 5th Congressional District against Mike Quigley. And so tomorrow there'll be a big protest.
Right. So 130, 300 East Randolph was Blue Cross Blue Shield building. We'll start there, and then we'll march to the Hyatt Regency, which is where the AMA is meeting, and medical students are pushing them to adopt a resolution to support single payer.
All right. The struggle continues. That is Samina Mustafa. I also want to thank Carlo Rotella, author of The World is Always Coming to an End. And the great Ramana Hussein was on the show, as she is every Friday, the Ramana Rundown, right here on the Ben Joravsky Show. I want to thank Leah. She does a fantastic job. She is the show editor. And, of course, the man, the myth, the legend, the pride of joy at Alton, Illinois. Samina, do you know that in Alton they call him White Lightning? Yeah, a lot of people don't know that.
No one calls me that. Not a doctor, not White Lightning.
Actually, the way you mash those together is call you whitening.
Yeah, whitening. Yeah, it's a good idea.
Man, that's awesome.
Give yourself a raise, young man. Take it out of petty cash. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Hey, and remember, you can download previous Ben Joravsky shows at both Chicago Sun-Times and Chicago Reader websites, chicago.suntimes.com/Joravsky, chicagoreader.com, and wherever else you download your favorite podcast, like Spotify. Yeah, we're on there now. I know, pretty cool, right? And hey, downloaders, you know we live stream the program, right? Yeah, Tuesday through Friday, 1 until 3 p.m. on both Chicago Sun-Times and Chicago Reader websites. Check out the Ben Joravsky Show on Facebook at Benny J Show, and be on the lookout for our Benny J bonus interviews. Have a good weekend.